There is a moment near the end of the 5th season where a Morty stands in front of a wall most people watching did not know was there. Not a wall in a house, not a wall around a city, a wall around reality itself, and he is about to put a hole in it. The first time I saw it, I sat forward, because in one short scene it reframed almost everything the show had spent years building under the jokes and the gore. And almost nobody outside the deep corners of the internet can explain what that wall was, why it was built, or what got out. Tonight we are going through all of it, the whole architecture of the Rick and Morty multiverse. From the portal gun, to the Central Finite Curve, to the man who murdered his way to the top of it. This is Paper Town. So get comfortable, turn the lights down low, and if you have not subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these. Let me start with the rule underneath every other rule, because if you get this one wrong, nothing else in the series makes sense. In Rick and Morty, the multiverse is infinite. Not large, not vast, infinite. In the full mathematical sense, Rick and Morty actually means it. There are endless parallel realities stacked beside our own, and inside each of them there is a version of every person, every planet, every choice, playing out slightly differently, or wildly differently, or almost identically. There is a universe where you exist exactly as you are right now, except you are wearing a different shirt. There is a universe where you were never born. There is a universe where the dinosaurs came back, ran a functioning civilization, apologized to humanity for leaving, and flew off into space. And yes, the series did that one on purpose. Because the number of realities is unlimited, every possible arrangement of matter that is not physically forbidden exists somewhere. Which means the strangest thing you can imagine is not only possible, it is guaranteed, sitting out there in some dimension with its own address. And this is where I want to slow down, because the infinite multiverse is the single idea people think they understand about this show, and usually do not. The trap is to assume that infinite means anything you want is available if you just look hard enough. That feels intuitive. If there are endless universes, surely there is one where the sad thing never happened. One where you kept the person you lost. One where it all worked out. The series sets that intuition up early and then spends its whole run taking it apart. Because infinity is not the same as generosity. An endless multiverse can still have doors that are welded shut, outcomes that have been deliberately deleted, whole categories of reality walled off from you by someone smarter and crueler than you are. Hold on to that idea, because it comes back later in the saddest possible way. And it is the difference between watching this show as a comedy about a drunk genius and watching it as a tragedy about a man who has infinite options and still cannot get the one thing he wants. The version of Rick we follow, the one in the garage, treats this infinity as furniture. To him, an entire universe is disposable. If he breaks one, he leaves. If he wants a fresh cheeseburger from a reality where the cows are tastier, he opens a hole in space and gets one. There is a coldness in that which the writing understands completely and never lets you forget. When you can access unlimited worlds, no single world matters and no single person in it matters either. Because there are endless copies of them one dimension over. That is the philosophical engine of the whole series, and it runs on this first rule. Infinite realities, infinite copies, infinite exits. The horror of the show and the comedy of Rick and Morty are the same horror and the same comedy, just told at different volumes, and both of them start here. Now, if the realities are infinite, some of them are going to be near duplicates of each other, and that turns out to matter enormously. Because there are unlimited universes that differ from ours by almost nothing. A molecule here, a coin flip there, a version of your kitchen where the light is slightly warmer. This is not a throwaway detail. It is the mechanism that lets the series pull off its cruelest magic trick, the one in the first season that changes who these characters even are. And we will get to that. Because once you understand that near-identical worlds are everywhere and cheap to reach, you understand how a person could lose their entire life and slot into a replacement so seamlessly that the audience does not notice for years. Rick and Morty noticed. The series was counting on you not to, so that is the ground floor. An endless multiverse, endless copies of everyone, endless worlds that are almost but not quite the same, and one family in one garage treating the whole structure like a vending machine. Everything else we talk about tonight, the technology, the politics, the war, the wall, is built on top of that single foundation, and the show's darkest idea is hiding inside it in plain sight, which is that infinite choice and total powerlessness can be the exact same thing. Which brings us to the machine that makes all of it possible, the object that turns the theory of infinite worlds into a school run and a grocery trip, the portal gun. It is a handheld device, small enough to sit in a coat pocket, and when Rick pulls the trigger, it opens a swirling green portal that you can step through to arrive somewhere else, either across the galaxy inside the same universe, or across the membrane into a completely different reality. That green liquid glow is the visual signature of the entire show. Before the theme song has even finished in that very first episode, Rick has one, waves it around a bar, and drags a terrified Morty through a hole in the air, and we the audience simply accept it, the way we accept that a phone can call the other side of the planet. But the portal gun is not a magic wand. And the series is careful, more careful than people give it credit for, about the fact that it has limits. The gun runs on portal fluid, a finite green substance, and when it runs out, you are stranded. That single constraint is doing a lot of quiet work across the series. It is the reason Rick is not a literal god. A god does not worry about fuel. Rick does. There are episodes that turn entirely on the fluid running low, on Rick needing to refill it, on the horror of being cut off from every exit at once, and that vulnerability is the only thing that keeps him inside a story at all. If travel were free and unlimited, there would be no jeopardy anywhere, ever, because he could always simply leave. The finite fluid is the leash. It is the reason a man with access to infinity can still be trapped in a garage in the suburbs, arguing with his son-in-law about the driveway. Here is a detail that surprises people. Rick did not invent the portal gun, not our Rick, not first. According to the series' own history, the original portal technology was created by another Rick entirely. A Rick and Morty eventually calls Rick Prime, and I promise we are going to spend real time on him, because he is the closest thing this series has to a devil. Our Rick, the C-137 Rick, is the only other Rick known to have independently figured out how to build the device from scratch. Every other Rick across the entire multiverse, and there are effectively unlimited Ricks, got the technology secondhand, handed down, or reverse engineered or stolen. That is a strange and important fact to hold. Two men, in the whole of infinity, cracked the code that opens up infinity, and the story of the series is, in a very real sense, the story of what those two men did to each other once they both had the key. Think about what the portal gun actually represents in the hands of someone like Rick. It is not just transport, it is the ability to opt out of consequences. Made a mess of an entire planet? Portal to a fresh one. Bored of your family? There are endless other versions waiting. Killed someone who mattered to you? Somewhere, there is a copy. The device is a technological answer to grief, to boredom, to guilt, to every human problem that normally has no exit. And the show's argument, the thing it keeps circling back to, is that having that exit does not heal you. It just lets you run. A man who can leave any room the instant it gets hard never has to sit in a hard room long enough to change, and Rick, for all his genius, is arguably the least changed person in his own life. The portal gun gave him everything and it froze him solid. There is one more thing about the gun worth naming before we move on, and it is subtle. The portal gun is a status object. Inside the society we are going to meet shortly, the one built entirely out of Ricks, owning and controlling portal technology is power itself. It is the currency. It sorts the strong from the weak. And because only two Ricks in all of creation actually invented it, the rest live in a kind of dependence, tied to a technology they use every day but could never have built. It is one of Rick and Morty's sharpest jokes about intelligence, that even in a civilization composed entirely of the smartest man in the universe, there is still a hierarchy, still a handful at the top and a vast crowd beneath them, still an economy of who has the good tools and who is begging for scraps. Infinite genius, and it reinvents inequality anyway. The gun is where you first feel that the multiverse is not a playground. It is a market, and somebody owns it. Now, if you have infinite universes and you actually want to navigate between them, you need addresses. You cannot say, "Meet me at the Earth," because there are endless Earths. So Rick and Morty gives its reality's registry names, and the best-known one, the one stamped on the whole series like a serial number, is C-137. That is the designation of the original universe where our Rick was born, which is why fans and the series itself refer to him as Rick. C-137. It is his home address, his surname in a sense, the label that follows him even when he is nowhere near home. The naming looks like random alphabet soup until you learn where the number comes from, and then it becomes one of my favorite pieces of trivia in the whole series. 137 is not arbitrary. In real physics, there is a number called the fine structure constant, which is roughly 1 over 137, and it is one of the strangest, most fundamental constants in nature. It describes how strongly light and matter interact, how electrically charged particles hold together, and physicists have spent a century unsettled by the fact that it is exactly the value it is, and nobody can say why. The number has an almost mystical reputation among scientists. This feeling that if you understood why it is 137, you would understand something deep about why the universe is allowed to exist at all. The show has never spelled out the connection in so many words, but the reading fans have embraced, and the one I find impossible to shake, is that the number is a nod to exactly that constant, the one figure in physics that feels like a cosmic combination lock, borrowed as the name of the home reality. Taken that way, it is not lazy sci-fi jargon. It is a joke aimed squarely at people who know what the fine structure constant is, and it rewards them for paying attention. The letter in front is a little looser. The C is often read as standing for central, tied to the whole apparatus of the Council of Ricks and the Central Finite Curve that we are building towards, though the series is not rigid about it. And the numbering system as a whole is, frankly, something the writers have played fast and loose with over the years. Which brings me to a warning I want to plant right now, because it is the single most common way people get the lore wrong. Do not assume that the dimension a character is from and the dimension a character lives in are the same thing. That distinction is going to detonate later, and half the confusion in online arguments about this show comes from people collapsing the two. Here is the clean version of that rule, and I want to state it precisely, because precision is the whole game with this series. Rick was born in C-137. That is his origin. That label never changes, no matter where he moves, no matter whose garage he ends up parked in, no matter how many realities he abandons along the way. A person's origin dimension is fixed, but where a person lives, the world they are physically standing in on any given day, can change, and for our characters it very much has changed, more than once, sometimes without the family even knowing it happened. When you keep those two ideas separate, the born dimension and the lived-in dimension, the show snaps into focus. When you let them blur together, you end up believing things that are simply not true, like that the family in the garage is Rick's original family, or that the Morty on screen is the Morty we started with. Neither of those is the case, and the machinery of dimension naming is the first quiet hint Rick and Morty drops that identity here is a slippery, address-based thing, that you are only ever the sum of where you came from and where you happen to be standing, and that both of those can be edited. So keep the addresses in mind. C-137, the home of our Rick, named after the one number in physics that keeps grown scientists up at night. It is a small joke with a large shadow, because it tells you that the writers thought about this structure seriously, that the multiverse is not just a wallpaper of pretty green portals, but a mapped, labeled, navigable place with an internal logic, and that logic is about to get a great deal darker, because the next thing to understand is that most of that infinite map is off-limits, sealed away behind a barrier that our Rick helped build. So let me finally take you to the wall, because this is the concept the whole video is named around in spirit, the one that reorganizes everything else once you see it. It is called the Central Finite Curve, and it is, in my opinion, the single best idea Rick and Morty ever committed to. Here is what it is. Out of the infinite multiverse, the truly endless spread of every possible reality, someone carved off a subset, a walled garden, and the rule that defines which universes are inside that garden is chillingly specific. The Central Finite Curve contains only the universes in which Rick is the smartest being alive. Every reality where a Rick sits at the top of the intellectual food chain, where nothing and no one outthinks him, was gathered together and sealed off from the rest of creation. Everything else, the vastly larger infinity of worlds where Rick is ordinary, or dead, or never born, or simply not the cleverest thing in the room, was walled out. Sit with what that means for a second, because the implications are staggering. It means that the entire world of the series, every adventure, every villain, every version of the family, every Rick and every Morty we have ever met, all of it takes place inside a curated bubble that was specifically filtered to guarantee that a Rick is always the main character. The Ricks did not just happen to be the smartest men in their universes. They engineered a pocket of reality where that would be true by definition, and then they lived inside it and called it the whole of existence. It is the ultimate expression of ego rendered as physics. A man so arrogant that he replumbed the multiverse itself to make sure he could never meet his better. And who built it? This is the gut punch. The Central Finite Curve was constructed by our Rick, working together with the assembled Ricks, using an advanced variation of the very portal technology we have been discussing, a colossal machine beneath their city. The man we have followed for years as the roguish, damaged anti-hero is one of the principal architects of a structure of pure narcissism with no rival in fiction. He helped wall off infinity so that no Rick would ever have to be second best. That reframes him completely. It is one thing to be an arrogant genius. It is another to have literally rebuilt the cosmos as a monument to that arrogance, and then to spend your days getting drunk inside it, pretending you are a prisoner of a world you personally designed to flatter you. Now here is the piece of this that I think is flat out brilliant as a matter of craft, and it is the reason I opened the whole video the way I did. The Central Finite Curve was first mentioned all the way back in the first season, dropped as a strange phrase in an episode about the Society of Ricks, and then Rick and Morty said almost nothing about it. For years, it sat there, a loose thread, a piece of jargon most viewers forgot entirely. And it was not fully explained, not really unpacked into the monstrous idea I just described, until the finale of the 5th season, which is somewhere in the region of 40 episodes, and the better part of 7 years later. 7 years. The series planted a seed in its first season and did not let it bloom until its 5th, and when it finally did, it recontextualized the entire series. That is a level of long-game patience you almost never see in television, and it is the payoff that made a lot of people go back and rewatch everything with new eyes. Let me connect this to the rule I asked you to hold at the very start, the one about infinity not being generous. The Central Finite Curve is the show making that idea literal. Yes, the multiverse is infinite. Yes, in principle there are endless worlds. But the characters cannot reach them, because they are trapped inside a bubble that was deliberately sealed. Their portal guns, powerful as they are, only ever move them around inside the curve, from one Rick-dominant reality to another Rick-dominant reality, never out into the true wild infinity beyond. They thought they were exploring the whole cosmos. They were pacing a very large cell. Every alien world, every bizarre dimension, every wild adventure, all of it was happening inside the gilded cage, and none of them knew, because the cage was so enormous it felt like everything. There is a loneliness baked into that design that I do not think the series gets enough credit for. Imagine building a reality where you are guaranteed to be the smartest person who has ever lived. On paper, it sounds like paradise for an ego like Rick's. In practice, it is a sentence to eternal solitude, because you have engineered away the possibility of ever being genuinely surprised, ever being taught anything, ever meeting someone who could be your equal, let alone your better. You have made yourself the loneliest man in a universe you personally shrank to fit your own head. The Central Finite Curve is not a fortress. It is a mirror maze, and every reflection is you. And Rick and Morty understands that this is not a triumph, it is a kind of hell, one that its most powerful character built with his own hands and then drowned inside. And, of course, if you build a wall, the story it is really telling is about the person determined to break through it. Because the moment you learn there is a barrier around everything, you are also being told that somebody, eventually, is going to punch a hole in it. Somebody trapped inside, who never asked to be there, who looked at the smug infinity of Ricks and felt only rage. Hold that thought, because that somebody is not a Rick at all. It is a Morty. But before we can understand why a Morty would want to shatter the wall, you have to see the society that the wall was built to protect. The strange, sad, teeming civilization of a million versions of the same man. Picture a city where every single citizen is the same man. Not similar men, not a family resemblance, the same man, copied out of a million different realities, each one convinced he is the real one, all of them crammed into a single sprawling metropolis, floating in a pocket of space that belongs to no universe at all. That is the Citadel of Ricks, and it is one of the strangest places the series ever built. It exists in its own little dimension, deliberately untethered from any single reality, which makes it a kind of neutral ground, a safe house for Ricks, who wanted somewhere the various galactic authorities and Rick hunters could not easily find them. Think of it as a gated community for the smartest man alive, except the community is entirely him, and he has, predictably, brought all of his worst qualities with him. Because here is the thing about a city of Ricks. Every one of them is a genius, and every one of them is a selfish, cynical, damaged individualist who cannot stand authority. So the moment you put millions of them together, you get chaos, and to manage that chaos they formed a governing body, the Council of Ricks. It was a small group of standout Ricks who ran the place, made the laws, and enforced them, judges and lawmakers and executioners all at once. The spokesman was a Rick called Rick the Fourth, and the council included figures with names like Quantum Rick and Zeta Alpha Rick, and a few others whose titles are the kind of grandiose nonsense you would expect a room full of egos to give themselves. And the deep joke of the council is that it is fundamentally absurd. A society of anarchists, every one of whom believes government is for idiots, nonetheless builds a government because even they cannot function in a pure crowd of themselves. The smartest men in infinity recreate bureaucracy. They cannot help it. Now, the Citadel is not only Ricks, it is also full of Mortys, and the reason for that is one of the coldest ideas in Rick and Morty. To a Rick, a Morty is not really a grandson. A Morty is a tool, and specifically, a Morty is camouflage. The show establishes that a Morty's ordinary, unremarkable brainwaves generate a kind of field that masks the distinctive genius signature of a Rick, hiding him from anyone trying to track him down. A Rick traveling with a Morty is much harder to detect than a Rick alone. So the Mortys function as cloaking devices, living, breathing camouflage for the men who are supposed to love them. That is why the Citadel breeds and assigns Mortys, pairing them off to Ricks like equipment being issued. Let that sit against the surface premise of the series, the adventures of a grandpa and his grandson. Underneath the whole warm cartoon idea of a boy and his grandfather is this. The boy is a device, and the grandfather knows it, and most Ricks feel nothing about it at all. This is where the series' real bitterness lives, and it is why I find the Citadel so much more disturbing than any of the gore or the monsters. The monsters are just set dressing. The deeply upsetting idea is a civilization built by the smartest being in existence that manages to reinvent every ugliness of human society from scratch. They have classes, they have wealth and poverty, they have a police force, and it is corrupt. They have an underclass of Mortys with no Rick, living in slums. Given infinite intelligence and a blank slate and the total freedom to build any society they wanted, the Ricks built the same broken machine we already live in, complete with the boot on the neck of the ones at the bottom. And the ones at the bottom, crucially, are the Mortys, the very children the whole structure claims to be organized around. That is the series telling you, with a straight face, that intelligence and decency have absolutely nothing to do with each other. That you can be the cleverest thing in creation and still build a world that grinds the weak into paste, and that maybe cleverness makes it worse, not better, because it removes every excuse. The Council of Ricks does not last, and it is worth naming when and how it falls, because it matters for keeping the timeline straight. The Council is effectively destroyed and dissolved early, around the opening of the third season, in the fallout of an arc where our Rick tears the whole structure apart. So for a lot of the series run, when people talk about the Council of Ricks as though it is still sitting in judgment, they are talking about something that is already gone. The Citadel itself carries on for a while afterwards, a society without its old government, which is exactly the condition that lets the next chapter of its history happen: the election, the rot, the reveal of who was really pulling the strings the whole time. But before we get there, the council does one thing that echoes through everything, one decision that tells you precisely how the Ricks feel about our Rick. They order him killed. After the Galactic Federation captures him, the Council of Ricks does not lift a finger to save one of their own. They mark him for assassination. Because to the Society of Ricks, even a Rick is disposable. There are always more. There are always infinite more. And that, in the end, is the disease at the center of this whole civilization. The belief, baked into every level of it, that no individual is worth anything because the supply of individuals is endless. It is the multiverse's first rule turned into a moral philosophy, and it is poison. If you want to actually feel the Citadel rather than just understand it, there is one episode you have to look at, and it is widely considered one of the best the show has ever made. It is the one in the third season that takes place almost entirely inside the Citadel, following not our Rick and Morty at all, but a whole cast of other Ricks and Mortys going about their ordinary lives in this city of duplicates. And the reason it lands so hard is that it drops the sci-fi zaniness and just plays the Citadel completely straight, as a grim urban drama. You follow a group of Morty school kids on a field trip. You follow a pair of Rick and Morty cops, one of them idealistic, one of them worn down and brutal. You follow a Rick working a soul-crushing factory job, and you follow a Morty running for president of the Citadel on a wave of hope and change. The factory storyline is the one that stays with me, because it is Rick and Morty at its most quietly savage. There is a product manufactured in the Citadel called Simple Rick's Wafers, a snack that is marketed as tasting like the pure, uncomplicated joy of a Rick spending a perfect afternoon with his baby daughter. And the horrifying reveal is how the flavor is produced. It is not artificial. There is a real Rick, strapped into a machine, forced to relive the single happiest memory of his life, the day he held his infant Beth, over and over on a loop, and the psychic resonance of that trapped happiness is harvested, bottled, and sold as a treat. A man's one moment of genuine love turned into a factory input, extracted from him forever, so that other versions of himself can snack on it. If you ever wanted a single image for what this show thinks about capitalism, about the way a system will strip mine even your most sacred private feeling and put it on a shelf, that is it. And the fact that both the victim and the customer are the same man is the blade twisting in the wound. Rick exploits Rick. Of course he does. Who else would know exactly where he is weakest? Then there is the election, and this is the thread that matters most for where we are going. A Morty, an unusually calm and eloquent Morty, runs for president of the Citadel, and his whole campaign is about the mistreatment of Mortys, about the underclass, about how this society uses and discards its own children. It is a stirring, righteous campaign, and against all odds he wins. He becomes the first Morty ever to lead the Citadel of Ricks, a genuine revolution, the tool becoming the master. And in the final moments of the episode, as this triumphant Morty walks through the halls of power and coolly has his political enemies dealt with, the camera lingers on his eye, and there is a specific detail, and if you have been paying attention across the whole series, your blood runs cold. Because you have seen this Morty before. This is not just any Morty. This is the Morty, the one the fandom had been whispering about since the very first season. This is Evil Morty, and he has just taken over the entire civilization of Ricks without a single one of them realizing who he is. That reveal is the hinge of the whole series, and it works precisely because the series spent so long building the Citadel as a real place with real cruelty in it. Evil Morty does not come out of nowhere. He comes out of exactly the conditions we just walked through: the slums, the cloaking devices, the disposable children, the smartest men alive treating their own grandsons as equipment. If you build a society that grinds Mortys into paste, sooner or later you manufacture a Morty who has had enough, and who is, crucially, just as clever as the men who made him, because he is cut from the same infinite cloth. The Ricks were so busy being the smartest thing in every room that they never once considered that the boy standing silently beside them, the living cloaking device, might be listening and learning and planning. The tragedy of the Citadel is that it was doomed by its own contempt. It could not imagine a Morty as a threat, right up until a Morty owned the place. And to understand what that Morty wanted and why he may be the character the entire series turns on, we have to go back and meet him properly, from the beginning. Evil Morty first appears back in the first season, in the same episode that first names the Central Finite Curve, which is a nice piece of symmetry once you know how his story ends. At the time, he looks like a minor villain's henchman. There is a particularly cruel Rick, operating off the grid, torturing Mortys, and he has a Morty sidekick who wears a little eye patch, and you assume this Morty is just a victim, another abused kid dragged along by a monstrous Rick. And then the episode turns everything over. The sadistic Rick is not the mastermind, the Morty is. The eye-patched Morty has been the one in control the entire time, and he has orchestrated the deaths of a large number of Ricks, dozens of them, in pursuit of a plan nobody around him even suspected was happening, because who suspects a Morty? He escapes at the end, vanishing into the crowd of identical Mortys, and Rick and Morty lets him go, plants him as a loose thread, and then does not seriously return to him for years. What I love about Evil Morty, and I mean actually love as a piece of writing, is that the name is a trick. He is called Evil Morty, and the fandom latched onto that, and it primes you to expect a cackling supervillain who wants to conquer or destroy. But when you finally understand what he is after, it is not domination at all. His goal, the thing driving every calculated murder and every year of patience, is freedom. He is a Morty who looked clearly at the entire structure we have been describing tonight. The Citadel, the cloaking devices, the disposable children, the wall around reality, and understood that he was born into a prison built by narcissists to flatter themselves. A prison in which a Morty exists only as an accessory to a Rick. And he decided he would not accept that. He would not be a tool. He would break the wall, get out, and never be anyone's cloaking device again. That reframing changes the moral weight of everything he does, and the series knows it. Because if you take his goal seriously, then Evil Morty is not the villain of the piece at all. He is the one character who correctly diagnosed the sickness of this whole civilization and refused to live inside it. He is the escaped prisoner, and the Ricks are the jailers, and the only reason we instinctively side against him is that we have spent years being invited to identify with a Rick. The show is doing something deeply uncomfortable here. It is asking whether the person who murders his way out of a cruel system is a monster, or whether the system that made murder the only available exit is the real monster, and it pointedly refuses to answer for you. The one thing it makes clear is that Evil Morty is not stupid, not cartoonish, and not motivated by simple malice. He is motivated by the plainest desire there is, the wish to stop being used. And the method of his escape is the coldest, cleverest long game in the series. He needs to break the Central Finite Curve, and to do that he needs to understand exactly how it was built, which means he needs the mind of one of the only two men who ever cracked portal technology from scratch. He needs the full contents of our Rick's brain. So his entire arc, the presidency, the maneuvering, all of it, is ultimately in service of getting our Rick into a chair and running a complete scan of his memories, extracting the schematic of the wall from the head of the man who helped raise it. He is patient in a way that Ricks, for all their genius, never are, because Ricks are impulsive and drunk and self-sabotaging, and Evil Morty is none of those things. He is what you get when you take a Rick-level intellect and strip out the self-pity, the addiction, the sentimentality, the need to be loved. He is a Rick's mind with a Morty's grievance and none of a Rick's weaknesses, and that combination is more dangerous than any Rick, which is the whole grim point. So hold him there, poised, having spent years building toward one scan of one specific brain. To understand what that scan reveals, and why it is the key to the wall, we finally have to open up the man himself. We have to talk about where our Rick actually comes from, what was done to him, and the single act of violence that made him the person we have been watching all along. Because the wall, the Citadel, the drinking, the cruelty, the whole armor of the smartest man in the universe, all of it grew out of one bombing in one garage, and the truth of that morning is the darkest thing this show has ever shown you. Here is who Rick was before he was Rick. A young scientist, brilliant of course, but not yet the Rick we know. He had a wife named Diane and a daughter named Beth, and by every indication he was happy, actually happy, in a small, ordinary domestic way that is almost impossible to picture on the version of him we have watched for years. He was working on his own scientific problems, teleportation among them, and he was, crucially, content. He was not trying to conquer the multiverse. He did not even seem to want it. He had a garage, a family, a life, and it was enough for him. Set that image beside the man in the flask-swigging present, and the distance between them is the whole tragedy of the series, compressed into a single before and after. And then another Rick arrived. A Rick from another reality, one who had already cracked interdimensional travel, and he came with an offer. Join me. Come and see infinity. Two versions of the same genius, side by side, one of them dangling the entire multiverse in front of the other. And our Rick said no. This is the detail that guts me every time, because it means the whole cosmic saga of Rick Sanchez begins with him choosing his family over infinity. He looked at the keys to all of creation and he turned them down, because he already had what he wanted at home. He was, in that moment, the least Rick-like Rick imaginable. A man who valued one ordinary woman and one ordinary child more than the power to go anywhere and be anything. The other Rick did not take the rejection well. This other Rick, the one Rick and Morty eventually names Rick Prime, responded to being turned down by building a bomb and detonating it in the garage, and the blast killed Diane and Beth. He murdered our Rick's wife and daughter, not in a fight, not for a resource, but essentially out of spite, because a version of himself had dared to want something other than what he wanted, had dared to prove that a Rick could be content without the multiverse, and that proof apparently could not be allowed to exist. It is one of the purest acts of evil in the whole series precisely because it is so petty at its root. Rick Prime did not gain anything. He just could not tolerate a Rick who was happy. Everything you know about our Rick grows out of that morning. The grief did to him exactly what you would fear. It took the man who had chosen family over infinity, and it inverted him completely. He finished his own portal gun, the second and only other original in all of creation, and he did it not out of curiosity, but out of a need for revenge, so that he could chase the specific Rick who had done this across every reality that existed. And in the hunt, he became the thing he had refused to become. He killed. He killed Ricks by the score, hunting for the one, and the more he killed, the less any of it seemed to matter. And somewhere in those decades of chasing a ghost across infinity, he stopped believing in anything at all. The nihilism, the drinking, the contempt for the value of any single life, the whole philosophy of nothing matters that he preaches at his grandson, none of it is wisdom. It is a wound. It is a man who lost the one thing that made existence bearable, and then spent his life constructing an elaborate intellectual case for why the loss did not mean anything, because the alternative, feeling how much it meant, would kill him. Rick's nihilism is not the truth he discovered at the bottom of the multiverse. It is the scar tissue over the one thing he could not bear to keep feeling. Now, the series did not hand you this backstory cleanly, and this is where I have to be careful and honest about how the story was told, because there is a real trap in it. A version of these events actually appeared earlier, in the premiere of the third season. Rick has been captured by the Galactic Federation and hooked into a device that lets an agent walk through his memories, and inside that simulation, Rick shows the agent this exact scene, another Rick offering interdimensional travel, the refusal, the murder of his family. It plays as the tragic origin, and then Rick pulls the rug out. He announces that the whole memory was fabricated, a fake he constructed to manipulate the agent and engineer his escape, and he escapes. So for years, the murdered family origin sat in a box marked possibly a lie, because Rick himself had told us it was a lie, and Rick is the least reliable narrator in television. He has faked memories. He lies as a reflex. Building your understanding of him on something he said inside a memory prison was clearly dangerous. And here is what the later seasons do with that ambiguity, which I think is masterful. The fifth season finale, through Evil Morty's brain scan, shows us the origin again, this time pulled directly out of Rick's own mind, without his permission, and without his ability to spin it, and it matches. And then the 7th season removes the last shred of doubt by making Rick Prime a present, physical antagonist whose history with Diane is treated as flat fact by everyone involved. So the murder is real. The happy young scientist who chose his family and lost them is real. Rick's deflection in that Federation prison was not Rick and Morty admitting it lied to you. It was the show showing you how Rick survives, by taking the truest, most painful thing about himself and reframing it, even to a torturer, as just another manipulation. Because for Rick, letting the pain be real in front of another person is the one thing more unbearable than the pain itself. He would rather you think his dead family was a con than let you see that they mattered. That is who the bombing made him. Now I have to take you back to the 6th episode of the entire series, because this is the one that secretly broke the series open, and most people watched it as a goofy standalone and did not realize the ground had shifted permanently under their feet. The setup is a classic bad Rick scheme. Morty wants a girl at school to like him, and he badgers Rick into making a love serum. Rick makes it, it works far too well, and then it goes catastrophically wrong. The serum mutates, jumps from person to person, and spreads across the entire planet, twisting nearly every human being on Earth into grotesque, writhing monsters. The fandom calls them Cronenbergs, after the director whose films they resemble. Rick tries to fix it and instead makes it worse, layering mutation on mutation until the whole world is a ruined landscape of monsters. And then Rick reaches the conclusion that tells you everything about him. This Earth is not fixable, so he does not fix it. He leaves it. And this is the mechanism that the very first rule of tonight set up, the near-identical worlds. Rick opens a portal to a parallel dimension, one almost exactly like the ruined one. The same house, the same family, the same lives. Except in this version, the disaster never happened. There is only one catch, and it is monstrous. In this new dimension, the local Rick and the local Morty have just died, right at that moment, killed in a garage explosion, leaving 2 vacancies. So our Rick and our Morty step through, walk up to their own fresh corpses, and bury the bodies of themselves in the backyard, and then they simply move into the dead version's lives. They sit down at that family's dinner table. They sleep in those beds. They answer to that mother and that father and that sister, none of whom know that their real Rick and their real Morty are rotting in the garden and have been replaced by refugees from a dimension they destroyed. I want you to really register how dark that is, because the series plays the burial almost as a joke, with Morty hyperventilating and Rick shrugging, and then it moves on and mostly never mentions it again for years. But think about what happened. Morty, a 14-year-old boy, watched his own dead body get lowered into a hole. He abandoned his actual mother, his actual father, his actual sister, all still alive back in the Cronenberg world, to be devoured by monsters or to survive alone in a ruin, and he took the place of a dead boy in a family that is not quite his. From that episode onward, the Morty you are watching, the Morty in every subsequent adventure, is living a borrowed life in a borrowed house with a borrowed family, and he is carrying the memory of his own grave. In the very next episode, there is a moment where Morty, trying to comfort his rattled sister after she learns an unwelcome truth about her own birth, tells her that nobody exists on purpose, nobody belongs anywhere, everybody is going to die, and to come and watch television with him, and it plays as a dark little gag, but it is actually the truest thing anyone says in the early seasons, because he has just learned it the hard way, standing over his own grave. So the replacement dimension becomes Rick and Morty's new normal, and the family we spend years with is, strictly speaking, not the family Morty was born to. Now I want to be precise here, because the exact registry number of that replacement dimension is one of those things Rick and Morty has been slippery about, and various sources and games have attached labels to it that the series itself does not firmly commit to on screen. So I will not sell you a hard number as canon. What matters is the structural fact, not the serial code. The point is that after the 6th episode, our Morty is a transplant, and his origin, the world he was actually born in, is that abandoned Cronenberg dimension, the ruined one. And for years that just sits there as a piece of dark early lore, until the show, characteristically, waits until the sixth season to reach back and detonate it. The episode that does it opens the sixth season, and it works off a beautifully simple idea. A portal gun malfunction triggers a reset that yanks every character who has ever traveled by portal back to their original home dimension, snapping them to their true point of origin like a rubber band. And watch where everyone lands, because it is a confession disguised as a plot device. Rick is pulled back to Dimension C-137, his true birthplace, confirming the address that has been his name all along. Jerry, of all people, gets pulled to his own separate origin dimension, which is its own weirdly hilarious and sad little detail, and Morty is pulled back to the Cronenberg dimension, the ruined world from the sixth episode. That is the series stating, in the plainest possible mechanical terms, where Morty is really from. His home is the world he and Rick abandoned. He is, and always was, a Cronenberg dimension Morty, wearing the life of a dead boy. And then comes the reveal that ties the entire war together, because Rick and Morty tells us whose dimension that ruined Cronenberg world actually is. It is Rick Prime's. The home reality of the Rick who murdered Diane and Beth is the same reality our Morty was born in, the same reality Rick chose to settle down in after the events of the sixth episode. And Rick admits why. He did not pick that family at random. He deliberately planted himself in Rick Prime's home dimension, living in his enemy's backyard, on the theory that if Rick Prime ever came home, our Rick would be right there waiting to kill him. The domestic life, the family dinners, the grandpa and grandson adventures, all of it was, at least in part, a stakeout. Rick embedded himself and a surrogate family inside the one dimension his nemesis might one day return to, and he waited. I want to be careful about one thing, because it is exactly the kind of detail people overstate. A lot of coverage of this reveal jumps straight to declaring that our Morty is literally Rick Prime's biological grandson, and you will see that stated flatly all over the internet. The series is more slippery than that. What is firmly established is that our Morty and the family come from the Cronenberg dimension, which is Rick Prime's home dimension, and that they are not the blood relatives of our Rick, whose real daughter Beth was murdered as a child. Whether the precise family tree makes Morty the direct biological grandson of Rick Prime is more of an inference than a stated fact. And the series has teased enough uncertainty around the family's exact origins that I would not put my full weight on the literal grandson claim. What you can say with confidence is the thing that actually matters emotionally. The boy Rick drags around on adventures, the boy he occasionally seems to love, comes from the home turf of the man who destroyed Rick's real family, and Rick chose him partly as bait. And to seal the horror, in the closing seconds of that episode, Rick Prime himself does return to that dimension, and he murders the Jerry living there, casually, and walks off with a wound in his neck that heals itself instantly, announcing to the audience that the devil is loose again and the war is very much back on. So now we can bring the two threads together, the escaped prisoner and the wounded architect, because in the finale of the fifth season they collide, and it is the biggest single episode of lore the show has ever produced. Evil Morty finally gets what his entire patient campaign was for. He gets our Rick into the chair and completes the full scan of his mind, and in doing so he extracts the one thing no one else in creation possessed, the working knowledge of how the wall around reality was built, straight from the head of the man who helped build it. That scan is also, not coincidentally, how the audience finally gets the true origin story, the young scientist, the murder, the whole history we just walked through, because we are essentially reading Rick's memories over Evil Morty's shoulder. The finale is Evil Morty using Rick as a blueprint, and Rick and Morty letting us see the blueprint at the same time. And then he does it. Using a device that harnesses the specific combination the whole system runs on, Rick and Morty genetics together with portal fluid, Evil Morty blasts a hole clean through the Central Finite Curve, the barrier that had sealed the Rick-dominant universes off from the true infinite multiverse since before the series began. This is the moment I opened on, the Morty standing in front of the wall nobody knew was there, about to breach it. And when the wall comes down, the consequences are apocalyptic in scale. The Citadel of Ricks, that entire teeming city of a million versions of the same man, is destroyed in the process. The society we spent whole episodes exploring, the factories and the slums and the corrupt police and the election, all of it is wiped out in the escape. Evil Morty does not just leave. He tears the roof off the prison on his way out, and he does not particularly care what happens to the inmates, because the inmates are the Ricks who built the prison in the first place. What lies on the other side of that hole is the detail that makes the whole thing sing, and it is the quiet devastation underneath all the spectacle. Beyond the wall is the true infinite multiverse, the real one, the one the curve was carved out of, and in that real multiverse, Rick is nothing. Out there, in the overwhelming majority of realities, Rick Sanchez is not the smartest being alive. He is ordinary, or he is a failure, or he is dead, or he was never born at all. The Central Finite Curve existed precisely to keep the Ricks from ever having to face that, to guarantee they would only ever encounter worlds that confirmed their supremacy. And Evil Morty steps through into the honest infinity where none of that is true, where a Rick is a nobody, and that is his freedom. He does not want to rule the multiverse. He wants to live somewhere that was never designed around a Rick at all, somewhere he can finally just be a person and not an accessory. A Morty hunted across all creation walks out into the one place where the name Rick means nothing, and he closes the door behind him. I find the ending genuinely moving, and I think it is the series' single most audacious structural move because of what it does to our Rick. For the entire series up to that point, our Rick has been coded as the mightiest being we know, the man who can solve anything, escape anything, outthink anyone. And the finale reveals that all of that power was only ever true inside a rigged game that he helped rig. Strip away the wall, put him in the real infinite multiverse, and he is just a broken old man who got lucky enough to be born inside the bubble that flatters him. The thing that made him a god was not his genius, it was the fence. And a Morty, the lowest creature in his whole cosmic order, the living cloaking device, is the one who figured that out and walked free while Rick was left standing in the wreckage of the only world where he mattered. If you ever wondered why Rick and Morty insists that Evil Morty, not any Rick, is the smartest character it has, that is the answer. He is the only one who saw the walls of the cage clearly enough to break them. It is worth pausing on what this does to the Rick Society going forward, because it closes a door the show can never reopen. After that finale, the Citadel is gone. It is not a functioning government or a place characters can visit anymore. The Council of Ricks was already long dissolved, and now the city itself is rubble scattered across the multiverse. Whatever comes next for the Ricks and Mortys of the wider cosmos, it happens without the central institution that organized their whole civilization. The series spent 5 seasons building the grandest piece of world architecture in modern animation, and then, in one finale, it knocked the entire thing down and pointed to the child standing in the ruins. That is a confident piece of storytelling, and it set up the final act of the war we have been circling all night, the confrontation with the man who started everything, the reckoning with Rick Prime. Which brings us to Rick Prime, and to the single cruelest device in the entire show, because to understand why the war between these two men could never simply be resolved by a trip to a happier universe, you have to understand what Rick Prime did with a weapon called the Omega device. And this is the part I most want you to hold on to tonight, because it is the exact place where casual understanding of this show goes wrong, and it is the piece that reaches all the way back to the very first thing I told you. Remember the intuition I warned you about at the start, the comforting idea that in an infinite multiverse there must always be a universe where the sad thing never happened, a world where the person you lost is still alive. For our Rick, that would mean somewhere out in the endless spread of realities, there is a Diane who never died, and if he could only reach her, the wound could close. It is the natural thing to assume, and I have seen countless people assume exactly that about this character. Just go find a universe where your wife is alive. With infinity on the table, surely one exists. And the series, with a coldness that honestly took my breath away when it landed, closes that door forever, and it does it through the Omega device. The Omega device is a weapon Rick Prime invented, and what it does is almost incomprehensibly final. It does not kill a person in one reality. It erases a chosen person and every single variant of them across every dimension of the entire multiverse, all at once, everywhere, permanently. It reaches into infinity itself and deletes someone from all of it. And it goes further still, tampering with the memories others hold of the erased person, so that not only are they gone from every world, the evidence that they ever existed begins to dissolve too. It is not murder. Murder is local. This is ontological. It is the unmaking of a person from the whole of creation. And Rick Prime used it on Diane. Not just the Diane in our Rick's home dimension, the one he bombed all those years ago. Every Diane. Every version of that woman in every reality that ever existed or could exist, wiped out of the multiverse in a single stroke. This is the confirmed, stated canon of the 7th season, and I need to be as clear about it as I can, because it is the negative fact that matters more than any other in the series. There is no universe with a living Diane, not one. The comforting infinite multiverse logic, the surely somewhere she survived, is not merely unlikely, it has been specifically and deliberately foreclosed by the villain, on purpose, as the ultimate act of cruelty. Rick Prime did not just take our Rick's wife. He took the very possibility of her, everywhere, for good. He salted infinity so that his enemy could never find comfort in it no matter how many worlds he searched. Think about what that does to Rick's whole existence. Here is a man with a portal gun, a man who can go literally anywhere, to any reality, and the one thing he would trade all of it for, a world with Diane still in it, is the one thing that does not exist anywhere in the infinite everything he can reach. His godlike freedom of movement is worthless against this. He can visit endless universes, and every single one of them is a universe without her. The Omega device turned infinity itself into a monument to his loss, made every possible world a world where she is missing. And that is why this is a tragedy, and not just a sci-fi adventure. Rick and Morty gave its hero access to everything, and then made sure the everything was hollow at the exact center where he needed it to be full. When I said at the start that infinite choice and total powerlessness can be the same thing, this is the sentence I was building toward. Rick can go anywhere. It does not matter. She is nowhere, and Rick Prime made it so. The confrontation itself comes in the 5th episode of the 7th season, and the series does something I did not expect, which is that it makes our Rick team up, temporarily, with Evil Morty to bring Rick Prime down. The two most dangerous escapees from the old order, the wounded architect and the freed prisoner, join forces for one job, hunting the devil who set both their stories in motion, and they succeed. They corner Rick Prime at last. Evil Morty, ever the strategist, takes what he actually came for, seizing the plans for the Omega device, the schematics for the deadliest weapon in existence, and then, having got his prize, he steps back and lets our Rick finish it. And our Rick does. Decades of hunting, decades of drinking, decades of killing the wrong Ricks. All of it ends with him beating Rick Prime to death with his own hands. The devil is dead. The man who murdered Diane and Beth, who bombed the garage, who salted infinity, is finally gone. And here is the thing that makes it a Rick and Morty ending rather than a triumphant one. It does not fix him. He gets the revenge he built his entire life around, the single goal that organized decades of destruction, and Diane is still erased from every reality, and the hole in him is still exactly the same size. Killing Rick Prime could never bring her back, because Rick Prime made sure of that before he died. So our Rick is left holding a completed revenge that changes nothing, standing over a corpse in a multiverse that is still, and will always be, empty of the one person he wanted. That is the show refusing the easy catharsis right to the end. The war is over, he won, and winning turns out to be just another empty room he can portal out of, into another empty room, forever. I want to name what Evil Morty does with the Omega device, because it is the final proof of who he actually is, and it cuts against everything the name led you to expect. He has, in his hands, the plans for a weapon that can delete anyone from all of existence. A cartoon supervillain would use it. Evil Morty deactivates the device and keeps only the schematics, and he explicitly says he will not use it, because he understands that the moment he did, every power in the universe would unite to hunt him down, and being hunted is the opposite of the only thing he has ever wanted, which is to be left alone. He keeps the plans purely as leverage, an insurance policy, a way of ensuring nobody bothers him, the most feared Morty in creation, holding the worst weapon ever built, chooses to do nothing with it and go home. He never wanted power. He wanted peace, and he is smart enough to know that using the ultimate weapon is the surest way to lose it. That restraint, from the character called Evil Morty, is the whole thesis of Rick and Morty hiding in plain sight. That the labels are lies, that the villain wants to be left alone, and the hero cannot stop destroying things, and that intelligence, in the end, tells you nothing at all about what a person will do with it. Let me step sideways for a moment to something that is easy to miss if you only think about the multiverse in terms of Ricks and Mortys, because there is a second great power in this cosmos, and its existence explains why the Ricks huddled together in a hidden city in the first place. That power is the Galactic Federation, a vast interstellar government that rules a huge portion of the ordinary universe, and it is the closest thing the series has to a mundane empire, all bureaucracy and troops and paperwork, a galaxy-spanning nanny state run by insectoid aliens called Gromflamites. To the Federation, Rick is public enemy number one, because a being that intelligent and that anti-authority is a threat to any system that wants its citizens ordered and obedient. And that antagonism is a big part of why the Citadel of Ricks exists at all. When you have every galactic power hunting you, you build yourself a hidden fortress in a pocket dimension where they cannot reach you. The safe house was a response to a threat, and the Federation was the threat. The Federation arc peaks at the end of the second season, at what should be a happy occasion, the wedding of Rick's oldest friend, the bird-like warrior called Bird Person. And it turns into one of the great gut punch endings, because Bird Person's bride, a human woman named Tammy, is revealed to be a deep-cover Federation agent who has spent the whole relationship as a lie in service of catching Rick. She guns Bird Person down at his own wedding, and Federation troops swarm the celebration. It is a betrayal so cold it reframes the entire season in hindsight, and it ends with Rick doing something almost unthinkable for him. To get his family to safety, he turns himself in to the Federation. The man who never sacrifices anything for anyone lays down his freedom for the people in that house, which tells you that underneath the nihilism, the attachment is real, however much he denies it. The follow-up, at the start of the third season, is the episode that first showed us the fake version of Rick's origin, the one I mentioned earlier that Rick later claimed he had fabricated. Imprisoned inside the Federation, Rick is hooked into a mind-reading interrogation device operated by a Gromflamite agent, and he uses the whole situation as an elaborate escape plan, feeding his captor a tragic backstory and then springing the trap. He breaks out, and on his way out he does something that shows the scale he operates on. He hacks the Federation's own systems and alters a single number in their financial infrastructure, and by making their currency effectively worthless in an instant, he collapses the entire galactic economy and brings the whole government to its knees. He does not defeat the Federation with an army, he defeats it with a decimal point. It is Rick and Morty's clearest statement of what a Rick actually is, not a fighter but a mind that can find the one lever that moves everything. And the terror of him is that he so rarely bothers to use that power for anything that matters. The aftermath of that jailbreak is what reset the whole family dynamic into the shape we know. With the Federation broken and Rick abruptly the ranking power in the household, the family fractures. Beth and Jerry's marriage falls apart. Rick installs himself, without fanfare, as the real authority in the home, having engineered a situation where the family needs him more than he needs any of them. There is a chilling reading of that whole arc, which is that Rick orchestrated a good deal of it, that a man who plays economies like instruments is more than capable of playing a family, and that he arranged to become indispensable on purpose. The series never confirms how much of it was calculated, and it is better for the ambiguity. What matters for our map of the multiverse is that the Federation arc shows you the other half of the cosmic power structure. It is not only Rick's all the way down. There are empires out there, ordinary and enormous, and the Ricks built their hidden city precisely because even the smartest man in the universe needs somewhere to hide from a government big enough to hunt him across the stars. The multiverse is not just infinite. It is politically crowded, and Rick spends his life a wanted man in most of it. If the big multiverse concepts are about copies of people scattered across realities, the show also runs a smaller, more intimate version of the same idea right inside the family, and it is one of the quietly devastating threads it has ever left dangling. It involves Beth, Rick's daughter, the grown woman, and a choice Rick offers her near the end of the third season. Beth has spent her whole life feeling trapped, a smart woman who gave up her dreams, stuck in a marriage and a house she resents, and Rick, in a rare moment of something like fatherly generosity, offers her a way out. He tells her she could leave all of it behind and go live an adventurous life out in space, exploring the galaxy, free. But there is a price. She would have to abandon her children and her life on Earth to do it, and Beth cannot decide. She is torn in half by the choice, the freedom on one side and the family on the other, and she cannot make herself pick. So she asks Rick for a solution, and the solution is pure Rick, a technological answer to an emotional problem. She asks him to make a clone, a perfect copy of herself who can stay home and live the Earth life and raise the kids, freeing the original to go to space without guilt. And Rick agrees, and he makes the clone, and then he does the thing that turns a clever sci-fi premise into a permanent open wound. He tells Beth, or at least he strongly implies, that he deliberately scrambled the two of them. He shuffled the original and the copy, and wiped the labels so thoroughly that even he, the man who built the clone, does not know which Beth is which anymore. One of them goes to space. One of them stays home, and neither they, nor Rick, nor the audience has any way of knowing whether the woman who left was the original or the copy, or whether the woman who stayed to raise Summer and Morty is the real Beth or a manufactured stand-in. Now think about why Rick would do that. Because on the surface it seems like pointless cruelty, and Rick and Morty gives you a couple of readings and refuses to settle between them. One reading is that it was mercy. If neither Beth knows which one is the clone, then neither one has to carry the specific horror of being the copy, the lesser one, the manufactured Beth. They both get to believe, with equal justification, that they are the original who made a real choice. By destroying the information, Rick made them equally real, or equally artificial, and spared both of them the knowledge that would break them. The other reading is darker and more characteristic. Rick did it because the question does not matter to him. To a man who genuinely believes there is no meaningful difference between an original and a perfect copy, because he has spent his life watching infinite copies of everyone spread across infinite realities, the whole idea of the real Beth is sentimental nonsense. A copy that is identical down to the atom is the person. There is no soul being counterfeited, and so he shuffled them because, to him, there was nothing being lost in the shuffle, and it is only the rest of us, clinging to the idea that we are singular and irreplaceable, who find it unbearable. And that is exactly what makes it land, because it drags the series' cosmic multiverse theme down onto the smallest, most human scale. Out in the infinite realities, the idea that countless copies of you exist is an abstraction, a bit of sci-fi vertigo you can hold at arm's length. But here it is at the dinner table. Here is a mother who does not know if she is the real mother. Here are children being raised by a woman who may be a 3-year-old copy wearing their mom's memories. Here is the philosophical horror of the multiverse. Are you the original? Does it even mean anything to be the original? Made painfully domestic. Both Beths continue to exist across the following seasons. There is the one who stayed, the one we mostly follow, and there is Space Beth, who went off and became a freedom fighter out in the galaxy, and the two of them even have to coexist and deal with each other, two identical women each privately wondering if she is the fake. And the crucial thing, the thing I most want you to take away, is that the series has never resolved it, and I am fairly convinced it never will, because the whole point is that it cannot be resolved. There is no secret answer the writers are sitting on. Even in universe, the information was deliberately destroyed. Both Beths have identical implants, identical memories, identical everything, because that is what a perfect clone means. Asking which is real is asking a question the universe of Rick and Morty has structured so that it has no answer. And I think that is the most honest thing the series has to say about the multiverse, in miniature. When you can copy a person perfectly, when there can be two of someone with equal claim to being themselves, the concept of the real one just dissolves in your hands, and you are left with the deeply uncomfortable suspicion that maybe it was always a comforting fiction. that maybe none of us are as singular as we need to believe we are. Rick looked at that abyss a long time ago and decided nothing matters, partly so he would not have to feel it. He handed his daughter the same abyss wrapped as a gift, and she has to live inside the question for the rest of her life. The show takes that same anxiety about copies and turns it into one of its most dizzying comedies in the 5th season, in an episode built entirely around the horror of not knowing whether you are the original. After the whole business with the shuffled Beths, Rick becomes worried about assassination, and so he does what a paranoid genius does. He builds decoy families, perfect artificial copies of the whole Smith household, Beth and Jerry and Summer and Morty, and even himself, robotic duplicates designed to be indistinguishable from the real thing, so that any assassin coming for the family would waste their shot on a fake. It is a sensible enough security measure, and then the episode reveals the flaw in it, and the flaw is beautiful. The decoys do not know they are decoys. Each artificial family is built to believe, completely, that it is the genuine article, the real Smiths, because a decoy that knew it was a decoy would not behave convincingly. So each decoy family, sincerely believing itself to be the true one and therefore a target, does exactly what the real Rick did. It builds its own decoys to protect itself. And those second-generation decoys, also believing they are real, build a third generation. And so on, a runaway chain reaction of copies making copies, until there are countless Smith families scattered around. Every single one of them convinced it is the one and only original. Every single one of them wrong, except, presumably, one, and possibly not even that one. The episode spirals into decoys hunting decoys, families slaughtering families, each side certain it is defending the real bloodline against imposters, when the truth is that almost everyone in the fight is an imposter who does not know it. There is a running gag inside all of this that I find genuinely funny, which is that each successive generation of decoy is built a little more cheaply and lazily than the last, because a copy building a copy does not put in quite the same care as the original, and the copy of that copy even less so. So as you go down the chain, the families get progressively more slapdash, more obviously artificial, a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox, degrading with each pass, and the series uses that as both a visual joke and a quiet philosophical point about how a thing loses fidelity the further it gets from a source that may not even have been special to begin with. It is a farce, and it is a horror story, and they are the same story, which is the series' favorite trick. What makes the decoy episode more than a gag is how it rhymes with everything else we have talked about tonight. This is the multiverse premise collapsed into a single house. Instead of infinite copies of the family spread across infinite realities, you get a mob of copies of the family crammed into one reality, all at once, and every one of them wrestling with the exact question the multiverse poses on a cosmic scale. Am I the real one? Does it matter? If a copy of me is identical to me, feels like me, remembers everything I remember, and is just as scared of dying as I am, what exactly makes me more real than it? The series keeps asking that question at every scale it can find, from the whole infinite multiverse, down to a daughter and her clone, down to a garage full of robot families murdering each other, and it never gives you the reassuring answer because it does not believe the reassuring answer is true. Its position, as far as it has one, is that the self you think is singular and precious is a lot more copyable and a lot less special than you would like, and that this is funny and terrible in exactly equal measure, and that the only character who has fully made peace with it is the one who drinks to keep from feeling anything else. Now I want to talk about how this show thinks about its own rules, because Rick and Morty is unusually, aggressively self-aware about being a story. And there is one episode in the 4th season that is basically the writers arguing with themselves and with the audience about the whole idea of canon. In it, Rick and Morty end up trapped on something called the Story Train, run by a villain called the Story Lord, and the train is a device that feeds on narrative, turning whoever is aboard into a series of self-contained little tales, anthology episodes, each one neat and satisfying and going nowhere. The Story Lord wants their adventures to become proper stories, with arcs and meaning and payoffs, because that is what he eats. and Rick's whole strategy for defeating him is to refuse. He deliberately starves the train by declining to have a story at all, insisting that nothing that happens matters, that there will be no character growth, no lasting consequences, no canon. It is a very funny episode, and it is also a genuine piece of Rick and Morty arguing about itself out loud. Because the tension the Storylord represents is the exact tension the writers actually live in. On one side is the audience that wants deep continuity, a mythology that builds, revelations that pay off, the Central Finite Curve mentioned in the first season and detonated in the fifth. On the other side is the show's instinct that caring too much about canon is a trap, that a comedy about a man who thinks nothing matters cannot itself start treating its own lore as sacred without becoming a lie, and the episode refuses to resolve that tension deliberately. It ends by pulling back to reveal that the entire cosmic adventure on the story train was, in the fiction, just a toy train set sitting in the Smith family house, a literal deflation of the whole thing, the series puncturing its own grandiosity in the last few seconds. It is the writers telling you, do not take the mythology too seriously. We certainly are trying not to, even as they clearly cannot help building one anyway. I find this weirdly useful as a key to the whole series, because it explains the strange double nature of the thing. Rick and Morty is simultaneously one of the tightest long-game mythologies in modern animation, with a wall built in Season 1 and breached in Season 5, a war set up in flashbacks and paid off seasons later, and also a show that openly sneers at the idea that any of that should matter to you. Both of those are sincere. The people making it clearly love the intricate architecture we have been mapping all night, or they would not have built it so carefully. And they are also deeply suspicious of that love, because Rick and Morty's entire philosophical stance is that meaning is something we impose on a universe that does not have any, and a story that took its own canon as gospel would be betraying that stance. So they build the cathedral, and then they point at it and remind you it is a toy train. Because of that, you should be a little careful about which parts of Rick and Morty you treat as hard multiverse canon. The meta episodes in particular are designed to slip out of your grip, to present things they have no intention of honoring later, and taking their internal contents as fixed lore is exactly the mistake the series is warning you against. There is a related rule worth naming, because people constantly try to solve the show's problems with it, and the series has carefully taken it off the table, and that is time travel. For all its dimension hopping, Rick and Morty almost never does time travel, and that is a deliberate design choice, not an oversight. The multiverse is the series' answer to every problem that a lesser story would solve by going back in time. Do not like how things turned out? You do not rewind. You cannot rewind. Instead, you portal sideways to a reality where it went differently, which is a fundamentally different and colder proposition, because you are not fixing your world, you are abandoning it for a copy. There is an early episode that toys with time, but even it is really about time fracturing and splitting, rather than a character freely traveling back to undo a mistake. And it is played as a nightmare of proliferating parallel versions rather than a clean do-over. Rick and Morty made its choice, sideways, not backwards. And that choice is thematically loaded, because time travel offers redemption, the chance to go back and be better, and the multiverse offers only escape, the chance to go somewhere else and be exactly the same. A story about people who can only ever move sideways is a story about people who can never undo what they have done, only run from it, and that is a much lonelier and more honest engine than a time machine would ever be. There is one more copy story worth telling, and this one happened in our reality, not Rick and Morty's, which makes it stranger than anything on screen. For the first 6 seasons, Rick and Morty were both voiced by the same man, one of the show's 2 creators, Justin Roiland, who co-created the series with Dan Harmon and performed both of those central voices himself, often improvising, the burps and the stammers and the whole rhythm of the two of them bouncing off each other. So the grandfather and the grandson, the 2 poles the entire show turns on, were literally one person talking to himself, which is a fitting bit of trivia for a series this obsessed with duplicates. And then, in early 2023, Adult Swim ended its association with Roiland, and the series suddenly faced a problem no amount of portal technology could solve. It had to replace the voice of its two leads, the sound that had defined it since the very first episode. I am going to keep this strictly to what is documented and leave the personal side of it alone, because it is not my place to speculate about anyone's private circumstances, and this channel does not do that. What matters for our purposes is the creative aftermath, because it turned into an accidental live demonstration of the series' own central theme. The production held auditions and recast both roles, bringing in new performers to voice Rick and Morty, and their brief was essentially to reproduce the originals as closely as possible, to sound so similar that a casual viewer might not even notice the change. And it worked, unnervingly well. When the 7th season aired, a great many people watched entire episodes without consciously registering that they were hearing different actors, that the Rick and the Morty they had known for a decade were now being performed by other people wearing the voices like costumes. Look at how perfectly that mirrors Rick and Morty. This is a series whose signature move is replacing a character with a near-identical copy and daring you to notice. It buried its own Rick and Morty in the backyard in the first season and slotted in duplicates. It shuffled Two Beths so nobody could tell the original from the clone. It built decoy families so convincing they fooled even themselves. And then, in real life, the series did the exact same thing to itself. It lost its original voices and replaced them with copies so faithful that the audience mostly accepted them without a fuss, living the premise of the show from the other side of the screen. If you wanted a piece of evidence that the series understood something true about how replaceable we all are, about how a good enough copy just becomes the thing, reality handed it one, and the series absorbed the change and kept going, because of course it did. That is what it has always said the multiverse does. The individual is not sacred. The role continues. Someone else steps into the life, and the story goes on. And the story is very much going on. As things stand, Rick and Morty has run for 9 seasons, and somewhere around 90 episodes since it premiered at the end of 2013, and it is not winding down. Adult Swim placed an enormous long-term order for the series years ago, enough to carry it all the way through a 12th season, which means there are years of this show still ahead of us. More multiverse to map, more walls to build and break. For a series that started as a crude, improvised parody of a science fiction movie, a raunchy little cartoon about a drunk scientist and his nervous grandson, to have become this sprawling, carefully architected mythology with a decade-plus runway still in front of it, is a remarkable thing, and it happened because underneath the burps and the gore, there was always a real idea, a real ache, driving the whole thing. The multiverse was never just a gimmick to generate wacky adventures. It was a machine for asking whether anything about a single life is irreplaceable, and Rick and Morty has been feeding itself into that machine, on screen and off, for over 10 years now. So far, we have been talking about the multiverse as something Rick travels through, a pre-existing infinity he opens doors into. But there is a whole other layer to this that is somehow even more unsettling, which is that Rick does not only visit universes, he creates them. And the episode that shows you this, in the 2nd season, is in my view one of the softly horrifying things the series has ever done, because it takes the multiverse premise and turns it into a story about slavery on a cosmic scale. The setup sounds like a throwaway gag. Rick's car runs on a battery, and when you look inside the battery, you find that it is not a battery in any normal sense. It is an entire miniature universe, a whole cosmos with its own planet and its own intelligent civilization, and Rick created it. He built a universe from scratch, seeded it with life, let that life evolve into a thinking species with cities and science and culture, and then he gave them a piece of technology, a little box, that they believe they invented and used to generate electricity for their society. Except the box siphons the overwhelming majority of that electricity out of their universe entirely, to power the car of a god they do not know exists. An entire civilization, billions of lives, unknowingly spends its whole existence generating power for a drunk man's vehicle. They think they are running their own world. They are a battery. It gets worse, and this is the part that turns it from a dark joke into something close to cosmic horror. Down in the microverse, there is a brilliant scientist of that species, and he has made a discovery that threatens Rick's whole arrangement. He has invented a new power source that makes the little boxes obsolete, And his power source is, of course, another universe. A universe he created, smaller still, nested inside the first one, whose civilization he is exploiting exactly the way Rick exploits his. And then, inside that universe, there is another scientist doing the exact same thing again, creating yet another universe further down. It is universes all the way down, an infinite regress of creators farming their creations for power, each one a god to the level beneath and a slave to the level above, and not one of them able to see the whole structure they are trapped inside. Rick is exploiting a universe that is exploiting a universe that is exploiting a universe, and somewhere above Rick, the series slyly implies, who is to say there is not someone doing the same thing to him? That image has stayed with me for years, because it is the series' cruelest and most complete statement about power. Intelligence, in this universe, does not lead to enlightenment or kindness. It leads to the ability to create life specifically in order to use it, and the smarter you are, the larger the scale on which you can do it. Rick is not special for exploiting a universe. Everyone clever enough to make one does exactly the same thing the moment they can, which is why the regress is infinite. The scientist in the microverse is not a victim who learns compassion. The instant he had the power, he became a Rick, farming his own creation without a flicker of guilt, and it is only when he is forced to see that he himself is somebody else's battery that he feels anything at all, and what he feels is not remorse for his own slaves, it is rage at being a slave. Nobody in the chain ever looks down with mercy. They only ever look up with fury. That is the show's view of intelligence stripped of sentiment, and it is bleak all the way through. Rick creates smaller universes more than once, and not always for power. There is a pocket dimension he built for his daughter when she was a little girl. A candy-colored safe world full of soft ground and breathable water and harmless creatures. A whole reality engineered as the ultimate child-proof playpen so that a young Beth would have somewhere to play where she could not hurt herself. He collapsed a piece of space-time to make it, an entire custom universe, and the reason is heartbreaking in a very particular way. He did it partly out of love, to protect her, and partly so that he would not have to actually parent her, so that a manufactured world could do the job of keeping her occupied and safe while he got on with his work. It is Rick's love expressed the only way he knows how, as engineering, as a problem solved with a machine, as a universe built to substitute for his presence. And of course it goes wrong, the safe little world curdling into something dangerous over the years, because a world is not a substitute for a father, and Rick and Morty knows it even when Rick does not. What all of this adds to our map of the multiverse is the realization that the infinity is not a fixed, natural landscape that Rick merely wanders. It is something that minds like his generate, casually, constantly, as tools and toys and prisons and playpens. Every sufficiently clever being in this cosmos is spinning up whole universes for their own purposes, and the beings inside those universes are doing it too. And the total structure is not a tidy stack of parallel worlds, but a mad, sprawling, recursive thing with no clear top and no clear bottom, full of creators who are also creations. It makes the question we keep circling even harder to escape. If your entire universe might be somebody's car battery, if your reality might exist only because a bored genius one level up needed to charge something, then what is left of the idea that your life is your own, that it means what you think it means? Rick has looked all the way down that hole and all the way up it, and it is one more reason he drinks. When you have seen that the cosmos might be nested exploitation without end, a smaller universe inside a larger one forever, it becomes very hard to believe that anything you do at your own little level matters at all. And believing exactly that is the sickness the whole show is about. Let me bring us up to the present, because the series has kept mapping this multiverse right into its most recent seasons, and some of the best recent episodes are specifically about the wreckage of everything we have discussed. Remember that the Citadel was destroyed, blown apart in the 5th season finale, and for a while the series left the question of what remained hanging. The 8th season finally goes back to answer it, in an episode staged like a grim western, and what it finds in the ruins is quietly perfect. There are survivors. Not many, but some, and crucially most of the survivors are clones, Mortys, who were manufactured in the Citadel itself, and therefore have no home reality to return to, nowhere to be snapped back to, because they were never from anywhere. They were made here, so when the city fell, they had no exit, and they stayed in the rubble. What those survivors build in the ruins is the whole tragedy of the Citadel replaying in miniature. The clone Mortys, free at last of the Ricks who ran everything, try to form a gentle little community, looking out for one another, sharing what scraps they have, a small society trying to be decent for once. And the surviving Ricks, of course, immediately start trying to rebuild the Citadel, using the Mortys as labor, recreating the exact hierarchy that got everyone killed the first time. Given a blank slate, a destroyed city, and a rare second chance to build something different, the Ricks reach instinctively for the same boot and the same neck. It takes one Rick, an outsider who has separated himself from the others, to blow the whole thing up a second time, sacrificing himself to keep the Ricks from rebuilding their machine, so that the clone Mortys can finally scatter and go live free, unremarkable lives somewhere out in the wider multiverse the wall used to keep them from. It is Rick and Morty returning to its oldest theme, that the Mortys only ever get to be free once the structure built to use them is reduced to ash, and even then only because one member of the ruling class chooses to burn it down. Then there is the Jerry material, which I did not expect to be as good as it is, because Jerry is the show's designated loser, the useless son-in-law, and giving him a multiverse story sounds like a recipe for a throwaway. Instead, the 8th season delivers an episode about an interdimensional passage that the wider Jerry population uses, a hidden network of portals connecting reality to reality, a road that lets a Jerry slip out of his own failing life and wander sideways into other versions of it. The road exists, it turns out, because it is made of portals Rick simply forgot to close, careless leftovers from his own travels that a whole population of sad, aimless Jerrys discovered and turned into an escape route. And that detail is so sharp it aches. Rick's discarded doors, the exits he could not be bothered to shut, become the entire infrastructure of Jerry escapism, a secret highway of men running away from their marriages and their disappointments, drifting between dimensions rather than face the lives they have. Running this network is a Jerry who actually made something of himself, a boss Jerry who operates a hub the wandering Jerrys pass through for a price, and the joke underneath the joke is that even Jerry, the ultimate nobody, gets a multiverse where some version of him found leverage and power. If there are infinite realities, then somewhere there is a Jerry who is not a loser, a Jerry with an operation and muscle and control, a Jerry who can make even Rick miserable. That is the multiverse premise turned on the one character it seemed least likely to elevate, and it lands because it is the same idea the whole show runs on, that every possible version of you is out there, including the ones you would least expect and least want to meet. Even Jerry contains multitudes. Even Jerry has a version that would frighten you. Meanwhile, out in the galaxy, the series keeps the Space Beth thread alive, checking in on the version of Rick's daughter who chose freedom and the stars over the house and the family, still tangled up with the remnants of galactic politics, still a living reminder of the unanswerable question at the center of that whole storyline. Every time she appears, the question comes back with her, the one nobody can answer and Rick and Morty will not, whether she is the woman who was born or the woman who was made. The 8th season, taken as a whole, is the series tending its garden, going back to the big structures it built in earlier years, the Citadel, the clones, the endless copies of every family member, and asking what became of them now that the wall is down and the old order is gone. And what it keeps finding, in ruin after ruin, is that the multiverse did not free anyone from themselves. The Ricks are still Ricks. The Jerrys are still running. The Mortys still have to burn the whole thing down just to get a normal life. Infinity changed the scenery and nothing else. And that brings us right to the edge of the known, to the 9th season, which is airing as I record this, which means I am going to flag clearly that this is fresh, still unfolding, and that anything I say about where it is going is provisional rather than settled. But the premiere alone is worth talking about, because it pulls two of our biggest threads straight back to the center. The season opens with Morty discovering something unsettling, which is that Rick has secretly been in contact with Evil Morty this whole time, privately texting the one mind in creation that is arguably sharper than his own. The two escapees from the old order, the wounded architect and the freed prisoner, who teamed up once to kill Rick Prime, have apparently kept a line open, and that alone tells you the series still sees those two as the real relationship at its heart, more than any grandfather and grandson. The reason for the contact is a new threat, and it is a big, cosmic one. An entity the show introduces as the Collective, a being that operates across multiple universes and, worst of all, appears to feed on them, absorbing whole realities into itself, assimilating them, a devourer of worlds with the power to swallow the multiverse piece by piece. Evil Morty, who wanted nothing more than to be left alone out in the honest infinity beyond the wall, finds even that peace threatened by something that eats the very realities he escaped into, and so he comes back to the one person capable of helping him fight it. It is a fitting escalation, if you think about it. We spent this whole video talking about characters who treat universes as disposable, as batteries and playpens and stakeouts and vending machines, and now Rick and Morty introduces something that treats universes as food, a power that makes even Rick look small, that does to whole realities what Rick does to a cheeseburger. I will not pretend to know how the season resolves, because it is still coming out. But the premiere already does something I love, and it circles right back to a rule we talked about earlier tonight. Remember that the series has always kept time travel off the table, that its characters can only ever move sideways into other realities, never backwards to undo anything. The premiere finally gives that rule teeth, because a force of time enforcers, cosmic police who guard against time travel, show up and take Evil Morty away. And the implication is that Rick has always known they exist, and has always steered clear of time travel precisely because of them. It reframes his lifelong avoidance of the one tool that could have saved Diane, and suddenly his refusal to go back looks less like a stylistic choice by the writers, and more like a rule Rick has been silently obeying out of fear, or wisdom, for the entire run of Rick and Morty. Whether that holds up as the season continues, I cannot tell you yet, but it is exactly the kind of move this series specializes in, reaching back years to a rule it planted almost silently, and revealing that it was load-bearing all along. What I take from the current state of the series, provisional as it is that Rick and Morty has not run out of multiverse to explore, and more importantly, has not run out of ways to use the multiverse to say something. It would have been so easy, this many seasons in, for the infinite realities to become a lazy plot generator, a way to reset anything and justify anything. And there are moments where the show flirts with that. But at its best, even now, it keeps returning the infinity to the same emotional core it started from. The question of whether a single life means anything when countless duplicates of it exist. Whether escape is the same as freedom. Whether the smartest thing in creation can ever actually be happy. 9 seasons in, with years still ahead of it, the series is still asking those questions, still refusing to answer them cleanly, and still finding new corners of its enormous cosmos to ask them from. The Collective, whatever it turns out to be, is just the newest mirror Rick and Morty is holding up to the oldest wound. There is a moral question sitting underneath this entire structure that I do not think the series ever lets you fully off the hook about, and it is the question of what happens to all the worlds Rick walks away from. Because the great convenience of the multiverse, the thing that makes it so useful to a man like Rick, is that consequences become optional. Ruin a planet and you portal to a fresh one. But the ruined planet does not stop existing the moment you leave it. The people you abandoned there keep living, or keep dying, in the mess you made and then fled. And Rick and Morty, to its enormous credit, does not always let those worlds stay conveniently out of sight. Think about the Cronenberg world, the Earth that got mutated into monsters and then abandoned when Rick and Morty simply moved to a fresher copy. For a long time, that was played as a one-off, a horror the pair escaped and never had to think about again. But the show went back. It made that abandoned reality Morty's actual origin, the place he is snapped back to when everything resets. And in doing so, it insisted that the world Rick threw away was never really gone. It was out there the whole time, ruined, waiting, and it turned out to be the home dimension of the very devil Rick spent his life hunting. The consequences Rick thought he had portaled away from came looping back around to sit at the center of his own story. That is the series quietly arguing that in a multiverse, You do not actually escape anything. You just relocate, and the abandoned world keeps its own accounts, and sometimes it comes to collect. And the survivors matter, which is a genuinely radical position for a show this cynical to take. When the Citadel fell, the series did not simply move on. It went back and found the ones left behind in the rubble, the clone Mortys with nowhere to return to, and it gave them a story and a shot at freedom, because even the disposable extras of this universe, the mass-produced camouflage children, turned out to have inner lives the moment the camera bothered to look at them. That is Rick and Morty catching itself. For years it invited you to adopt Rick's view, that the endless copies do not matter because there are always more. And then, again and again, it stops and shows you one of those supposedly interchangeable copies up close, terrified, hopeful, exactly as real to itself as you are to yourself, and it dares you to keep believing the copy does not count. Every time the series does that, it is refuting its own main character. Rick says nothing matters because everything is replaceable. The show keeps zooming in on the replaceable things and finding that they matter to themselves, which is the only place mattering ever actually happens. This is the tension that keeps the series from being merely bleak, and it is why I keep coming back to it rather than to slicker, tidier shows. Rick and Morty hands its most magnetic character a deeply seductive philosophy, the idea that across infinite realities nothing you do has weight, that guilt is for people who cannot see the big picture, that you can always leave. And then it spends episode after episode showing you the human cost of actually living that way. The abandoned families, the ruined worlds, the daughter handed an unanswerable question about her own reality, the grandson raised as bait in the backyard of his creator's enemy. If nothing matters, why does all of this hurt so much? Why does Rick and Morty keep lingering on the pain of the people Rick writes off? The answer the series seems to reach, without ever stating it outright, is that the nihilism is a lie Rick tells himself to survive his own grief, and that the constant ache underneath every adventure is the series refusing to let that lie stand. The universes are infinite and disposable to Rick. They are not disposable to the people who live in them, and the people who live in them are the whole point. So when you watch Rick casually destroy a reality and move on, do not let Rick and Morty's flippant tone fool you into thinking it agrees with him. Watch where the camera goes afterwards. It goes to the wreckage. It goes to the abandoned. It comes back, seasons later, to the world you were told to forget, and it makes you sit in the fact that it was always still there. The multiverse in this show is not a get-out-of-jail-free card, however much its protagonist wants to use it as one. It is a vast accumulating ledger of everything he has run from, and the deepest suspense of the whole series is the growing sense that a ledger like that always, eventually, gets balanced. Rick Prime came back. The Cronenberg world came back. The Citadel survivors came back. Nothing Rick abandons stays abandoned, and that, more than any portal gun, is the real law of this universe. I want to spend a little more time on Rick Prime himself, because he is the character the series revolves around and yet shows you the least of, and understanding what he represents is the final piece of the multiverse puzzle. We have covered what he did, the murder, the Omega device, the erasure of every Diane, but the deeper question is what he is, philosophically, and the answer is that Rick Prime is our Rick, with the one thing removed that makes our Rick bearable. He is the Rick who never had a family he loved, or who never let himself love one, the Rick who looked at the whole multiverse and felt no pull toward any single person in it at all. Where our Rick's nihilism is a scar over a wound, Rick Prime's nihilism appears to be genuine, load-bearing, the real thing. He does not believe nothing matters as a defense against grief. He simply does not seem to have the capacity for the attachment that would make grief possible. That is why the murder of Diane is so revealing, and why it is the ideological center of the entire series. Rick Prime did not kill our Rick's family for a resource, or in self-defense, or even really out of hatred. He killed them because our Rick had proved something intolerable to him, that a version of himself could choose love over infinity and be content. To a being like Rick Prime, that choice is not just wrong, it is an accusation. Every happy Rick is a living argument that the cold path, the infinity path, was not the only option, that the emptiness Rick Prime built his whole existence on was a choice rather than a necessity, and he could not let that argument stand, so he erased it. First, the specific Diane in that garage, and eventually, with the Omega device, every Diane everywhere, because as long as a single reality contained a version of that love, it was proof that he had thrown something real away. Rick Prime did not salt infinity out of cruelty alone. He did it to win an argument with himself, to make sure that no version of the domestic happiness he had rejected could exist anywhere to reproach him. That is a deeply chilling idea, and it elevates him far above a standard villain. Rick Prime is what our Rick is terrified of becoming, and also, in his darkest moments, what our Rick suspects he already is. Because remember, our Rick did become a mass murderer of Ricks in his hunt. He did sink into the nihilism. He did treat universes as disposable and people as interchangeable. The distance between our Rick and Rick Prime is not as wide as our Rick would like it to be, and the show knows that, which is why the final confrontation between them is so loaded. When our Rick beats Rick Prime to death, he is not just killing the man who murdered his family. He is trying to kill the version of himself that the man represents. The possibility that he is fundamentally the same creature, that the only difference between them is that one of them got to keep his love for a few years longer before it was taken. And the terrible ambiguity of that ending is whether killing Rick Prime proves our Rick is different, or proves he is exactly the same, a Rick beating another Rick to death in an empty universe over a woman neither of them can ever get back. There is a detail about Rick Prime I find quietly terrifying, which is how casually powerful he is. When he returns to murder the Jerry of the Cronenberg dimension, he takes a mortal wound to the neck, and it simply heals. Instantly, the flesh knitting itself back together as though nothing happened, because he has equipped himself with technology or biology far beyond even the other Ricks. He is not just the smartest and coldest Rick. He is the furthest upgraded, the one who spent his freedom from attachment turning himself into something that barely needs to fear death at all. Attachment slows you down. Love gives you something to lose, something to protect, something that can be used against you. Rick Prime cut all of that away and used the freedom it bought him to become nearly unkillable. And the fact that our Rick killed him anyway is either Rick and Morty insisting that love wins in the end, or the series admitting that our Rick had become cold enough to match him. It refuses to tell you which, and that refusal is the whole tragedy in a single unanswered question. The most haunting thing about Rick Prime is that we never really get to know him, and I think that is deliberate. He is kept at a distance, glimpsed, referenced, feared, present mostly as an absence, a shape our Rick has organized his entire life around. And that is exactly right for what he is. Because Rick Prime is not a person so much as a direction, the cold vector our Rick could have traveled all the way down and mostly did. To flesh him out, to give him quips and a personality and screen time would have made him smaller. Left as a near-silent, near-invisible force of pure detachment, he stays enormous, the black hole at the center of the series' moral universe, the answer to the question of what a Rick becomes when you remove every last trace of the thing that makes him human. He is what is left when the love is gone, and the fact that he and our Rick are the same man, split only by whether that love was ever allowed to exist, is the truest thing the multiverse of this series has to say. Not every use of the multiverse in this show is apocalyptic, and I want to slow down on one of the gentler, funnier applications of it, because it is secretly one of the smartest, gentlest things the series ever did. Early on, Rick hooks the family television up to what he calls interdimensional cable, a signal that pulls in television broadcasts from across the infinite realities all at once. Endless channels of alien programming, most of it improvised nonsense, adverts for products that could only exist in some other dimension, films with casts of creatures from realities we will never visit. On its face, it is just an excuse for the writers to riff, and it is very funny. But the deeper idea underneath it is staggering when you stop to think about it. If the realities are infinite, then the media of those realities is infinite too, an unlimited library of everything anyone anywhere ever made, and Rick can just tune into it from the couch. The whole creative output of infinity, playing on basic cable. But the part of that episode that actually matters, the part that has stayed with people for years, is not the alien television at all. It is the goggles. Alongside the cable, Rick gives the family a way to look in on the lives of their own alternate selves, to watch the versions of themselves in other realities who made different choices, and the family cannot resist. And what they find breaks something open in each of them. Jerry watches a version of himself who became a famous, celebrated man, a success in every way our Jerry is not, and has to sit with the crushing knowledge that a better Jerry exists and that he is not him. Beth watches a version of herself who chased the ambitious career she gave up, who became the accomplished professional she always wanted to be, and discovers that this successful other Beth is lonely and unhappy, which forces our Beth to reckon with whether the life she resents might actually be the better one. And Summer spirals when she learns something painful about the circumstances of her own birth, leading into that famous scene we already touched on, where her brother tells her the bleakest possible truth and invites her to come watch television anyway. What that episode understands, and what makes it more than a gimmick, is that the multiverse is a machine for the one thought human beings cannot stop having, the thought of what if. What if I had chosen differently? What if I had been braver, or luckier, or born to different parents? Every person alive carries around a ghost of the life they did not live, the alternate self who took the other path, and normally that ghost is a fantasy, unprovable, safely imaginary. Rick and Morty makes it real. In this universe, the road not taken is not a metaphor, it is a channel you can watch. Your better self and your worse self both actually exist, out there, living the lives you can only wonder about. And Rick and Morty asks what it would do to a person to actually see them. The answer, for this family, is that it is devastating, because the alternate lives do not deliver the simple lesson you expect. The successful versions are not simply happier. The failed versions are not simply sadder. What the goggles teach the family, in the end, is that comparing your life to the infinite lives you did not live is a form of madness, that the only life you can actually inhabit is this one, and that peace, such as it is, comes from stopping the comparison and choosing to be present in the reality you are actually standing in. That is a remarkably mature thing for a raunchy sci-fi cartoon to say, and it is the multiverse working as therapy rather than horror for once. Beth, at the end of that episode, makes a kind of peace with her ordinary life precisely because she saw that the extraordinary version of it was hollow. She stops mourning the road not taken. And that is the show offering, very briefly, the one piece of consolation its whole cosmology seems designed to withhold, that the infinity of other selves does not have to be a source of despair, that it can instead be the thing that finally reconciles you to the self you are. The tragedy of Rick is that he has access to all of that infinity, and it only ever deepened his despair. The small grace of that early episode is that his daughter, given the same view, somehow used it to come home to her own life. Same multiverse, opposite result, and the difference between them is the whole difference between drowning and swimming. If there are infinite Ricks, then logically every possible kind of Rick has to exist somewhere. And I think one of its saddest and most easily missed implications is what it means for goodness. Because if the multiverse contains every version of this man, then it does not only contain the drunk, the killer, the nihilist, the architect of the wall, it also contains the kind ones. Somewhere out there is a Rick who never lost his family, a Rick who stayed gentle, a Rick who used his impossible intelligence to help rather than to hurt. Infinity guarantees it, and the series, in one of its sharpest strokes, actually introduces us to one of them and then shows us exactly how the society of Ricks treats a Rick who is decent. His nickname among the other Ricks is Doofus Rick, and he is, by any honest measure, the best Rick we ever meet. He is gentle, socially awkward, sweet-natured, endlessly patient, the kind of person who would rather make you a nice meal than belittle you. He is not stupid. He is a Rick, so he is a genius. He has simply directed that genius toward being helpful and warm instead of cruel and grand. And for this, the other Ricks despise him. They mock him relentlessly. They treat his kindness as a defect, a failure of Rickness, something contemptible. In the society that filtered the entire multiverse to gather only the universes where Rick sits at the top, the one quality that gets you cast out is being nice. The Ricks built a civilization that has room for torturers and tyrants and mass murderers of their own kind. but no respect at all for the Rick who is simply good. That tells you everything about what this cosmos actually values, and it is not intelligence, and it is certainly not kindness. It is dominance, and a kind Rick has voluntarily stepped off the ladder of dominance, and so to the others he barely counts as a Rick at all. I find that almost unbearably sad, because it means the series is telling you that goodness exists in this multiverse, abundantly, infinitely, and that it is powerless. For every cruel Rick, there is a kind one, but the cruel ones built the Citadel, and made the rules, and ran the council, and the kind ones get laughed at and shoved aside. It is not that the universe lacks good people. It is that the good ones do not fight for power, almost by definition, because wanting power the way a Rick Prime wants it is itself a kind of sickness, and so the people least suited to run things are the ones who end up running everything. That is a bleak and very adult observation for a cartoon to bury inside a joke character, and it reframes our Rick too, because it means his cruelty was a choice. Somewhere, there is a version of him who chose otherwise, who kept his softness, and our Rick knows it, and it is one more thing he drinks to avoid thinking about. The same logic runs through the Mortys, and it is why Evil Morty is so much more than a twist villain. If there are infinite Mortys, then most of them are exactly what a Morty is supposed to be. Ordinary, anxious, kind, disposable, the perfect little cloaking device. But infinity also guarantees the outliers. The Mortys who are cleverer, the Mortys who are angrier, the one Morty in all of creation who put those two things together and refuse to be used. The Citadel is full of Mortys who accepted their role. Mortys who became cops enforcing the system that oppressed them. Mortys who ran little shops in Mortytown. Mortys who died silently as camouflage for a Rick who never learned their name. And then there is the one who looked at all of that and said no. The reason Rick and Morty can build an entire mythology around a single Morty is precisely because there are infinite Mortys, which means the existence of one extraordinary one is not a contrivance, it is a mathematical certainty. In an infinite population, the exception must exist. Evil Morty is simply the series finding him. That is the strange gift and curse of an infinite cast of the same two people. It means every trait, every path, every version is real somewhere. The best Rick and the worst Rick. The Morty who submits and the Morty who burns it all down. The Beth who left and the Beth who stayed. The Jerry who is a joke and the Jerry who runs an empire. Nothing is off the table, because everything is on it. Everywhere, always. And what the show does with that, again and again, is use it to strip away every excuse. Our Rick cannot say this is just who I am, because infinite other versions of exactly who he is chose differently. Our Morty cannot be dismissed as just a kid, because a version of that kid conquered a civilization. The infinite multiverse, in the end, is a mirror that shows every character the full range of what they could have been, and forces them to admit that where they landed was, at some level, a choice. That is a heavy thing to hand a person. It is why almost everyone in this show is running from something, and why the running never works, because you cannot outrun a multiverse that contains every possible version of your own face. When you step back from all the machinery, the portal guns and the wall, and the Citadel and the Omega device, what you are left with is a single question that the whole show keeps asking through different mouths, and I think the cleanest way to understand the multiverse is to see it as a stage built specifically to pose that question. The question is this: what do you do once you truly understand that nothing you love is safe, that everything can be copied, that every version of every good thing exists somewhere and can be taken from you somewhere, that the universe is infinite and indifferent and will not protect a single thing you care about? Every major figure in this show is an answer to that question, and the multiverse is just the apparatus that lets Rick and Morty run the experiment at full scale. Rick Prime is the first answer, and it is the coldest. His response to the terrifying size and indifference of the multiverse is to feel nothing at all, to want nothing, to love no one, and thereby to become untouchable. If you have no attachments, nothing can be used against you. If you do not care whether any particular reality or person exists, then the infinite disposability of everything is not a horror, it is a liberation. Rick Prime looked at the multiverse and concluded that the only winning move is not to love, and he followed that logic all the way to its end, becoming something barely human, nearly unkillable, utterly free and utterly empty. His answer works, in the sense that it made him the strongest being we meet. And the series clearly regards it as damnation, as the worst thing a person can become, a man who solved the problem of loss by amputating the part of himself that could lose. He is the cautionary extreme, the proof that you can win the game the multiverse sets, and in doing so stop being a person at all. Our Rick is the second answer, and it is the tragic middle. He could not do what Rick Prime did. He loved, once, fully, and he lost it, and the loss nearly destroyed him. But instead of amputating his capacity for love the way Prime did, our Rick did something more human and more broken. He kept the love and buried it, entombed it under layers of nihilism and alcohol and cruelty and constant motion, telling himself and everyone around him that nothing matters, precisely because for him, one thing mattered so much that its loss was unsurvivable. Our Rick is what happens when a person who truly loved tries to adopt Rick Prime's philosophy after the fact, as a coping mechanism, and cannot quite manage it, because the love is still down there, leaking out in the moments he saves his family, in the fact that he settled with a surrogate family at all, in the way he keeps a grandson beside him. He is a walking contradiction, a man performing detachment over a wound that will not close, and the whole pathos of the series lives in that gap between what he says and what he does. He says nothing matters. He keeps acting like some things do, and he hates himself for both. Evil Morty is the third answer, and it is the one the series seems to find the clearest-eyed, even as it is chilling in its own right. His response to the cruel, rigged, indifferent multiverse is neither to stop loving nor to bury his pain in motion. It is to refuse the game entirely. He looked at the whole structure, the wall, the hierarchy, the disposability, and he did not try to win it or numb himself to it. He tried to leave it, to get out of the rigged arena altogether and find somewhere the rules were not written by narcissists to serve narcissists. His answer is escape, but a very specific and lucid kind of escape, not the running in place that our Rick does, hopping from reality to reality inside the same cage, but an actual exit, a genuine departure from the system into somewhere it does not reach. And the reason it feels like the sanest answer in Rick and Morty is that it is the only one aimed at building a different life rather than enduring or dominating the existing one. Evil Morty does not want to be the strongest thing in the cage. He wants there to be no cage. Of the three, he is the only one trying to change the terms rather than just survive them. And here is what I think is the quiet genius of setting all three of these answers inside a multiverse specifically, rather than in an ordinary story. In a normal narrative, these would just be three characters with three attitudes. But because the show is built on infinite realities, the three of them are not merely different people. They are, in a sense, the same person, or nearly so, arriving at different answers to the same wound. Rick Prime and our Rick are literally the same man split by whether his love was allowed to survive. Evil Morty is a Morty, yes, but he is a Morty who became Rick-like in intellect, a version of the grandson who grew into something adjacent to the grandfather. So the whole philosophical debate of the series is happening, in effect, inside variations of one or two people, which is exactly what a multiverse lets you do. It lets you take a single soul and shatter it into every possible response to the same suffering, and then set those responses against each other and watch. The infinite realities are not just a sandbox for adventures. They are a laboratory for the human heart, a way of asking what are all the things a person could become when the thing they love is taken, and then showing you every answer at once. Rick and Morty, to its enormous credit, refuses to declare a winner. It does not tell you that Evil Morty is right, even though his answer seems the clearest, because his escape is built on a mountain of corpses and a coldness of his own. It does not redeem our Rick, even though he is the one we love, because his love keeps expressing itself as damage to everyone near him. And it does not let Rick Prime simply be a monster you can dismiss, because his logic is airtight and his power is real, and some part of every grieving person understands the temptation to just stop feeling. Three answers, all of them coherent, all of them terrible in their own way, none of them the way out. That is the multiverse's final lesson, delivered not as a statement but as a structure. When everything can be lost and everything can be copied, there may simply be no clean way to be a person, only a set of broken strategies, and the truest thing a story can do is lay them all side by side and admit that it does not know which one saves you, because it suspects none of them do. I want to be honest with you about how much of this the series has deliberately left unanswered, because part of respecting a mystery is admitting where the edges of what we actually know are, and this series has a lot of edges it has chosen never to sand down. The biggest one, the one I keep circling back to, is the question of which Beth is the clone. I told you earlier that the series scrambled the two so thoroughly that even Rick does not know, and I want to be clear that this is not a puzzle waiting for a clever fan to solve. There is no hidden frame, no line of dialogue, no secret answer. The information was destroyed inside the story on purpose, which means the question is permanently open by design, and anyone who tells you they have definitively worked out which Beth is real is telling you something the show has structurally made impossible to know. The family tree has its own deliberate fog around it. We know for certain that our Rick's original wife and daughter were murdered, and we know the family he lives with now comes from the Cronenberg dimension, which is Rick Prime's home reality. A great deal of the internet has run ahead of that to declare our Morty the literal biological grandson of Rick Prime, and while that is a reasonable inference, Rick and Morty itself has been slipperier than the confident headlines suggest, teasing uncertainty about the exact relationships, even at one point playing with the idea that Rick himself might not be quite what he appears. I am not going to resolve for you tonight something the writers have chosen to keep unresolved. What I can tell you firmly is the emotional shape of it, that the family is not his by blood, that the connections are chosen and constructed rather than given, and that the series finds this more interesting than a clean bloodline, because a family you chose and could leave is a much heavier thing than a family you were simply born into. Then there is the largest question of all, the one the Nested Universe episode raised and never closed. If Rick creates universes as batteries, and the beings in those universes create their own, and it goes down forever, then the obvious and terrifying question is whether it also goes up forever. Is our Rick the smartest being in his own reality, himself sitting inside someone else's battery? Is the entire multiverse we have been mapping tonight just one layer in an infinite stack, with something above it farming it for power, the way Rick farms the microverse? Rick and Morty raised that possibility and then, characteristically, walked away from it, leaving it hanging as a piece of cosmic vertigo rather than a plot to resolve. And I think that is correct, because the moment you answered it, you would shrink it. An unanswered question about whether there is a god above Rick is enormous. Any specific answer would be smaller than the question. So the series leaves the top of the stack dark, and that darkness is one of the truest things it has ever shown, because it mirrors exactly the position we are all actually in, unable to see whether anything sits above our own reality, unable to know if we are the top layer or just another battery humming away for someone we will never meet. And of course, the newest questions are still open because they are still airing. Where the current season goes, what the collective turns out to be, what happens to Evil Morty now that the Guardians of Time have taken him, whether our Rick's strange long-distance relationship with his grandson's darkest variant curdles or deepens. All of that is unwritten as I speak, and I would rather leave it honestly unfinished than pretend to a certainty I do not have. This is a living show, still building its cosmos, still leaving doors ajar. The map we have drawn tonight is accurate as far as it goes, but it has blank regions at its edges marked "Here be dragons," and the show put those blanks there on purpose. A multiverse you could fully map would not be infinite. The unanswered questions are not failures of the writing. They are the writing being honest about what infinity actually means, which is that there will always, by definition, be more than you can ever see, and that the wisest thing a story about infinity can do is leave you staring at an edge it refuses to draw past. For all the coldness we have been mapping, I do not want to leave you with the impression that this is a show about a man who feels nothing, because that reading is exactly the trap the series is warning you against, and the multiverse is the very tool it uses to spring the trap. Rick preaches that nothing matters, that everyone is replaceable, that across an endless multiverse no single person is worth grieving, And then Rick and Morty shows you, over and over, that he does not actually believe a word of it, that his whole nihilistic philosophy is a story he tells to survive feelings too large to face directly. The evidence is not in what he says, it is in what he does, in the moments the mask slips, and once you start watching for those moments, the entire character reorganizes around them. Think about the fact that he turned himself into a galactic government he despises, surrendered his freedom to the one force in the cosmos hunting him, purely to get his family to safety. A man who truly believed his family was interchangeable, one version among infinite copies, would never have done that. You do not sacrifice your freedom for something you consider replaceable. Think about the deeper fact underneath the whole series, that after losing his real wife and daughter, this man did not wander the multiverse alone as Rick Prime did. He found another family in another dimension, and he settled with them, and he stayed. Yes, he told himself it was a stakeout, a tactic, bait for his enemy. But you do not need to attend a granddaughter's every crisis, or drag a grandson on adventures for years, or feel the things he visibly feels in his worst moments if it is only ever strategy. Somewhere in the calculation, the surrogate became real to him, and he would rather die than admit it. Because admitting it would mean acknowledging that he can be hurt again, that he has once more built his happiness on people the indifferent multiverse could take away. His oldest friend is another crack in the armor. Rick has almost no one he considers an equal, no one he lets close, and the one great friendship of his life was betrayed in the cruelest possible way, at a wedding, by someone who turned out to be an agent sent to destroy him, gutting Rick in a way he never fully recovers from. A man who felt nothing would have shrugged that off as data. Our Rick did not shrug it off. He carried it, and he later went to extraordinary and self-endangering lengths for that friend, the kind of lengths a person only goes to for someone who truly matters to them. The multiverse gave Rick every reason and every means to never care about anyone, to treat all relationships as disposable, because copies are always available, and the whole quiet tragedy of him is that he tried to live that way and could not, that underneath the performance of not caring is a man who cares so much it is unbearable, which is precisely why he performs. This is why I keep insisting the series is a tragedy rather than a nihilistic comedy, and why the multiverse is the perfect engine for that tragedy. A tragedy requires that something matters and is lost. If Rick truly believed nothing mattered, there would be no tragedy, just a series of amusing cosmic pranks. Rick and Morty only works, only lands the emotional weight it lands, because we can see that Rick's nihilism is false, that it is a wound dressed up as a worldview, and that the multiverse he built and rules and drinks his way through is not evidence that nothing matters, but rather the elaborate machine he constructed to avoid feeling how much things do. The infinite realities are not his liberation. They are his hiding place. Every portal he opens is a door he runs through to avoid sitting still long enough to feel what he lost. And the reason he can never stop moving is that the moment he stopped, the grief he has been outrunning for decades would finally catch him. And that, in the end, is the most human thing about this wildly inhuman show. Strip away the aliens and the gore and the science, and what you have is a story about a man who lost the love of his life and could not bear it, and who responded by building the largest possible structure to hide inside, an entire walled infinity, a city of himself, a technology of endless escape, all of it in service of not feeling one specific loss. The multiverse, for all its cosmic scale, is the psychology of grief rendered as physics. It is what avoidance would look like if avoidance had infinite resources. And the show's deepest suggestion, the thing it circles without ever quite saying, is that no amount of infinity can outrun a single finite loss, that a man with access to every reality is still just a man who misses his wife, and that all the doors in all the worlds lead, eventually, back to the one room he cannot enter, the one with her in it, which no longer exists anywhere at all. It is worth stepping back to notice how strange it is that this particular idea, the multiverse, became the defining story engine of an entire era of popular culture, and how early and how differently Rick and Morty got there. For a stretch of years, it felt like every other big film and series was reaching for parallel realities, alternate versions of familiar heroes, the endless what if. The largest movie franchises built whole phases around it. An independent film about a woman glimpsing the infinite lives she might have lived swept the grandest awards there are. The multiverse went from a piece of niche physics-flavored science fiction to the water the whole culture was swimming in, a shared vocabulary for a moment that felt, to a lot of people, fractured and overwhelming and full of roads not taken. Rick and Morty was there before most of that wave, and more importantly, it used the idea for something almost opposite to how the blockbusters used it. In a lot of mainstream multiverse storytelling, the infinite realities are ultimately a source of wonder and possibility, a toy box of exciting variants, a way to bring back beloved characters and stage spectacular team-ups, and often a reassurance, a sense that somewhere things worked out, that the alternate path is available, that love finds a way across realities. Rick and Morty looked at the same premise and drew the bleaker, and I would argue the more honest, conclusion. In this show, infinite realities do not reassure you, they diminish you. If there are endless versions of you, then you are not special, your choices do not carry the weight you thought, and the person you love is one of countless copies. The series took the culture's favorite comforting toy and found the horror inside it. The way an infinite multiverse followed to its logical end does not promise that somewhere things worked out so much as guarantee that everything, including every failure and every loss, is happening somewhere, endlessly, forever. That is why I think the series has aged into something more serious than it was first taken for. When it began, a lot of people filed it as a clever, crude, hyperactive comedy, a science fiction parody with good jokes and gross-out gags, and it is that. But underneath, it was doing the most rigorous thinking about the multiverse that popular culture produced in this whole period. Taking the premise more seriously than the prestige films did, refusing the easy consolations, following the cold logic all the way down to where it actually leads. The wall around reality, the deletion of a person from every timeline, the civilization that filtered infinity to flatter itself, the man hiding from his grief inside endless worlds. These are not the moves of a show that saw the multiverse as a toy. They are the moves of a show that understood the multiverse as a deeply frightening idea and had the nerve to sit inside that fear and make you laugh at the same time. And the culture's hunger for the multiverse, I suspect, comes from the same place Rick and Morty's power comes from, which is that the idea speaks to something real about how it feels to be alive right now. We live surrounded by images of the lives we are not living, scrolling past infinite versions of what we might have been, aware as no previous generation was of every road not taken, every alternate self we could compare ourselves to and find ourselves wanting. The multiverse became the defining metaphor of the era because the era already felt like a multiverse, an overwhelming sprawl of possibility that somehow produces not liberation, but paralysis and grief. Rick and Morty named that feeling years ago and built a whole cosmos to explore it, and that is why, underneath the burps and the portals, it keeps striking people as true. It is not really a show about science fiction. It is a show about the specific loneliness of knowing too much about all the lives you will never live, which is a very modern kind of loneliness, and possibly the defining one. There is one word that runs underneath this entire cosmos, and it is not a scientific one. It is home. For a show about the freedom to go anywhere, Rick and Morty is obsessed, almost achingly, with the idea of home, and nearly every character in it is in some way homeless, in a way no portal can fix. Consider what we have established tonight. Our Morty's true home is a ruined dimension full of monsters that he can never really go back to, and the house he lives in belongs to a dead boy. The family he lives with are not, by blood, our Rick's home either. They are a substitute assembled in enemy territory. The clone Mortys of the fallen Citadel have no home dimension at all, because they were manufactured, born of nowhere, with no reality to be snapped back to. The Wandering Jerrys built an entire secret road, specifically because they could not stand to be home. Space Beth chose the stars over home and has to wonder forever whether the self she left behind was even the real one. And our Rick, the man at the center of it all, is a widower whose actual home, the garage with his wife and daughter in it, was blown up decades ago and then erased from every reality that could ever have contained it. So here is a show where the characters can travel to literally infinite worlds, and the deepest ache in all of them is that not one of those worlds is home. That is not an accident. That is the series' most personal idea, hiding underneath the cosmic machinery. Because the portal gun, the ultimate symbol of freedom, is also the ultimate symbol of rootlessness. If you can go anywhere, then nowhere holds you. If every reality is available, then no reality is yours. The very power that makes Rick a god is the same power that ensures he belongs nowhere, that every place is just another place he is passing through on his way to the next. Home requires the opposite of a portal gun. Home requires staying, requires a place mattering more than the infinite alternatives, requires closing the door on all the other options and saying this is mine, I am not leaving. And that is the one thing Rick constitutionally cannot do, because doing it once, with Diane, is what got his heart destroyed. I think that is why the small domestic scenes in the show hit as hard as the cosmic ones, sometimes harder. A breakfast, an argument in the kitchen, a family sitting on a couch watching television, these ordinary moments carry an enormous weight precisely because they are surrounded by infinity, because we know what it costs to have them and how easily they could vanish. Rick and Morty keeps returning to that suburban house, that garage, that dinner table, and the return is the point. In a story where everyone can go anywhere, the boldest, most vulnerable act is to come home to the same modest house and the same imperfect people, again and again, and to let it matter. Rick does that, despite everything, despite his philosophy, despite the infinite exits available to him at every second. He keeps coming back to that garage, and the fact that he does, that a man who could be anywhere in all of creation chooses, night after night, to be in a suburban garage near the people he pretends not to love, is maybe the quiet answer the series offers to the despair of the multiverse. Not that infinity is a lie, but that the only cure for it is to choose one small finite place and one small finite set of people, and treat them as though they were the whole of everything, because in the only way that actually matters, they are. Home is not a place the portal gun can take you. It is a place you decide to stop. The last thing I find myself thinking about, as Rick and Morty heads deeper into its later seasons with years still ordered ahead of it, is the strange problem of how a story like this could ever actually end. Because an infinite multiverse is, almost by definition, a machine that resists endings. If there are endless realities, endless versions, endless second chances and alternate paths, then how do you ever land a final note that means anything, when the audience knows that somewhere, in some reality, it went differently? A normal story ends by closing doors, by making a choice final. This one built its whole world out of the refusal to let any door stay closed. That is a genuine narrative trap, and the series is aware of it, which is part of what all that self-referential material about canon and story was really about. The writers thinking out loud about whether a tale this open can ever be brought to rest. And yet I think the show has been building the answer to its own problem the whole time, and the answer is not cosmic at all. It is that the multiverse can be as infinite as it likes, but a heart is finite. Rick can travel to endless worlds, but he only had one Diane, and when she was erased from all of them, the infinity stopped being able to help him. Morty can be one of countless Mortys, but he only gets one childhood, and it was spent in a borrowed house over his own grave. The way you end an infinite story, it turns out, is by remembering that the people inside it are not infinite, that each of them has exactly one life they are actually living, no matter how many copies exist, and that endings belong to people, not to universes. The multiverse cannot end, but Rick can find peace, or fail to. Morty can grow up, or break. The story does not need to close every door in infinity. It only needs to close the one in the garage, to let its damaged man either finally feel what he lost or be destroyed by refusing to, and that is an ending a heart can hold, even when the cosmos cannot. Whether the series sticks that landing is a question for the years ahead, and I honestly do not know if it will, because sticking it means doing the one thing the whole series is about avoiding, which is stopping, sitting still, letting the grief arrive. A show about a man who runs from feeling would have to end by making him stop running, and it is not at all clear that a character built so thoroughly around escape can survive being caught. Maybe that is the real suspense underneath all the portals and the villains and the walls. Not whether Rick can defeat the next threat, but whether he can ever let himself be a person again. Whether the man who built an infinity to hide in can find his way back out of it, to the small, finite life that was the only thing that ever made him happy. The multiverse was never the mystery. Rick's own heart was the mystery, and the infinite realities were just the enormous, beautiful, terrible metaphor Rick and Morty wrapped around it so that we would feel the size of what one man lost. So that is the map, as complete as I can draw it tonight, from the first green portal to the wall around reality, to the man beating his oldest enemy to death in a universe with no one left in it to save. It is as intricate and ambitious a piece of world building as television has produced, and the reason it works, the reason people go back to it again and again with charts and theories and reverence, is that under all the cleverness, it is about the simplest and oldest thing there is, which is a person trying and failing to outrun a loss, and using every tool the universe can offer, up to and including infinity itself, to avoid the one thing that might actually heal him, which is to stop and stay and grieve. If there is one thing I would leave you with before we drift toward the end, it is that the whole map we have drawn tonight transforms the early episodes into something they were not the first time through. And going back to watch them again with all of this in your head is one of the great pleasures this show offers. The first time you watch that opening season, it plays as a loose, wild, almost improvised comedy. A drunk grandfather and a nervous boy stumbling through science fiction mishaps with no particular sense that any of it connects. And then you learn everything, and you go back, and every early episode is secretly holding a knife behind its back. Watch that 6th episode again, the one where they move to the replacement dimension, and it is no longer a standalone gag about a love potion. It is the quiet origin of the entire show, the moment the family you thought you knew was swapped out for another, the moment a boy buried himself and kept walking. Watch the moment the phrase Central Finite Curve first gets muttered, seasons before anyone explains it. And it is no longer alphabet soup. It is a loaded gun placed on the mantle to be fired 5 years later. Watch the very first scene of the very first episode, Rick drunk in the kitchen dragging Morty out into the night, and knowing what you now know about the dead wife and the erased daughter and the decades of hunting, that stumbling drunk is not comic relief anymore. He is a man in the deepest grief imaginable, performing chaos so that no one, least of all himself, has to notice the size of the hole he is walking around. The series was telling you who he was from the first second. You just could not read it yet. That is the reward this series gives to patience, and it is rare. Most shows get smaller when you learn their secrets, because the mystery was the only thing holding them up. Rick and Morty gets bigger, because the mystery was never the point. The grief was, and the grief was always there, in every frame, waiting for you to have enough of the map to see it. The lore, the dimensions, the wall, the war, all the intricate machinery we spent tonight assembling is not there to be clever for its own sake. It is there so that when you finally understand it and go back, the ordinary moments, the breakfasts and the burps and the throwaway lines are revealed to have been carrying the whole emotional weight all along. That is why people make the charts and write the theories and stay up too late arguing about which Beth is real. Not because they want to solve a puzzle, but because the puzzle, once solved, hands them back a sadder and truer version of a show they thought they were only laughing at. So the next time you cannot sleep and you put on an early episode you have seen a dozen times, watch it with the map. Watch the man who can go anywhere choose, again, to come home to a garage. Watch the boy who has no real home pretend he does. Watch the infinite multiverse fail, over and over, to fill a single finite hole in a single finite heart. It is all there, from the beginning, hiding in plain sight, and once you can see it, you can never quite unsee it, which is the mark of a story that was always more than it pretended to be. We have traveled a long way tonight, from a green portal in a suburban garage all the way out to a wall around reality and the honest infinity beyond it. And if your eyes have grown heavy somewhere along the road, that is exactly as it should be. There is something strangely soothing about a show this vast and this bleak. And I think it is because a story about infinite worlds has a way of making your own worries feel smaller, of setting the small anxieties of a single ordinary night against a backdrop so enormous that they loosen their grip a little. Whatever is keeping you up, it is one tiny thing in one tiny reality, and there are endless others, and Rick and Morty, for all its darkness, somehow makes that a comfort rather than a terror by the time you have sat with it long enough. It is worth remembering, as you drift off, what this show actually managed to do. It started as a rough, rude little cartoon that most people expected to burn bright and vanish, and instead it became one of the boldest pieces of long-form storytelling of its era. A decade-spanning meditation on grief and freedom and loneliness, disguised as a science fiction comedy, watched and rewatched and argued over by millions of people who came for the jokes and stayed for the ache underneath them. It took the biggest idea in modern popular culture, the multiverse, and instead of using it as a toy box, it used it as a mirror. And what it showed us in that mirror was not aliens or spaceships, but ourselves, our own restlessness, our own way of running from the things that hurt, our own hunger for all the lives we will never live. That is a rare achievement for any story, let alone one that opens with a drunk man belching in a kitchen. And maybe that is the real reason a show like this is good company at the end of a long day. Not because it answers anything, it refuses to, but because it sits honestly with the questions that keep all of us up at night, the ones about whether our choices matter, whether we are as replaceable as we fear, whether the roads we did not take were better, and it holds those questions without flinching and without lying to you about how hard they are. There is a strange peace in being told the truth, even a difficult truth, by a story that respects you enough not to wrap it in false comfort. The multiverse of Rick and Morty is enormous and cold and full of loss, and yet the deepest thing it keeps whispering, underneath all of that, is a small and human and almost tender idea, that the cure for infinity is to love one finite place and one finite handful of people as though they were everything, because they are. So let that be the thought you fall asleep on. Not the wall or the war or the weapon that erased a woman from every reality, but the man who, given all of creation to escape into, kept coming home to the same small house anyway, and the quiet suggestion that in a universe of endless doors, choosing to stay might be the bravest thing a person can do. Rest easy, the multiverse will keep spinning without you for a few hours. It has infinite time. You only have tonight, so let it be a good and peaceful one. Thank you so much for spending this time with me here at Paper Town. If you made it this far, or if you are already halfway into a dream, either way, I am grateful you let me keep you company tonight. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.